Now.
Wicked. Okay, hello everybody, good morning and welcome to Phantasy Saturday School with East and 198. This project is supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, so thank you very much for them. And we're just going to run through some intros, some housekeeping, and then we can get into everything. So hello, my name is Rochelle White. I am the co-founder of East. I'm also a multidisciplinary artist. I work across video, film, installation, and photography as well. And I'm also very invested in arts education, which is how East has kind of come about. So we're now in our third year. We're really, really excited to be launching this program. And I've been working alongside Hamid on Phantasy Saturday School for the past, oh my gosh, 4 months with Paula's help as well, which has been really amazing.
Actually, last year.
Last year, oh my gosh, yes. So this was supposed to be physical. A lot of what we do is very heavily kind of reliant on physical space and really being able to feel each other, smell each other, touch each other. It's very kind of multisensory, but you know, due to COVID and everything, we've had to work in this way, which actually works really well in terms of accessibility as well for everybody. So we're really grateful that we're able to do this project now. So yeah, that's me, Hamid.
Hello, my name is Hamid. I am also an artist, and yeah, thank you all for sharing this space with us. And yeah, this project has been ongoing for the last couple of months. As Rochelle said, it was meant to be a physical project and in real life. We first started it off with Matty, and Matty passed the baton on to Paula, who's been working on this project with us. And yeah, I guess we just would like to explore some ideas, some thoughts, and just learn with each other. So to start off, I'm going to just quickly run through some housekeeping, which you should have received this morning. So the housekeeping rules are, please have your lesson pack at hand for the lecture, particularly for Evan's lecture. And this lesson is being recorded, so if you would like to join in with video, please feel free. If not, you can turn your cameras off. If you have a discussion point, type into the chat and Rotimi will notify you of if you want to speak, or if you just want to type it out, then your question will then be addressed. When you have any audio on, please keep away any devices which might cause any audio interference or feedback or anything of that sort. And yeah, I think with the way these things go, we should all just try and be mindful of the space we're taking up when we're trying to deliver a question or a discussion point, and just to be mindful of how much space you take up and how much time you might take up, and allowing other people to also get their points in. Please feel very much free to use the reaction button in Zoom. If, for example, you agree with someone's point, you could just do that. And it should come up. And yeah, just asking everyone to be respectful of each other's space and anyone's points. And if you disagree with anyone, you can voice that, but we can all do it in a very respectful way. And at the end of the session, you can also save the chat, which kind of acts like a transcript. So you can keep it as a personal archive for yourself. And yeah, that's it really. So I'm gonna pass over to Paula, who's going to tell us a bit more about 198, who we're collaborating with on this project.
Hi everyone, good morning or afternoon, or I think some of you are maybe in good night somewhere. My name is Paula Nassif and I am the project manager for 198 Contemporary Arts and Learning. 198 is a registered charity based in Brixton in London. It's a venue for exhibition of visual arts, a community hub, and arts education center. It has been open since December 1988, and it has contributed to the regeneration of Brixton following the race riots in the 80s. Originally, it was a community art space, very small, and it continues to be like this, but of course, networks and projects have grown with the years. 198 has helped nurture the Black arts movement into a contemporary visual arts organization and continues to search out artistic excellence and investing in emerging talents, particularly focusing on the development of young people. So right now, 198 is going through a period of rebuilding. So for 2020 into potentially early 2021, the building is closed. And so we have been doing satellite projects, which were, of course, supposed to happen physically in London, but because of COVID-19, we've had to re-strategize everything, and perhaps with many blessings, because I think many of you are not located in London. So this is very nice to be able to include others in this project. So we have, during this period that we are not active in our space, we have decided to catalog and digitize 198's archive. And as a part of that project, we've invited artists and collectives like East to work with us, engage with our archive material as a starting point, and create projects that are that engage in community and that also help us highlight how we can make our archive available for people to explore and enjoy. So very excited for today's session. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. And yes, I hand over back to Hamed or Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Paolo. I really appreciate it. It's been amazing working with you. So thank you so much for being on board with us throughout this time. Next up is Josh Woolford. I would like to introduce them. They are multidisciplinary creative, working between communication, fashion, and performance. And they will be inviting us to respond to some provocations that they've been developing in regards to education, expanding on kind of new methods of working within education and new models of working as well. I will let them take over because they'll do much better at explaining what they're up to. So thank you, Josh.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Michelle, and thank you, East and 198, for having me, first of all, and also thank you everyone for joining. It's the first time presenting to strangers, so let's see how it goes, but I'm sure it's going to be fine. The introduction was actually perfect. I don't think I really need to expand on that. The only thing I would add is that I've just finished my first year at the RCA, and what I'm presenting is basically a read-through of my thesis, which I submitted 2 weeks ago. So it's going to be like basically text. I'm putting a lot of quotes and things on screen so you can follow along, because well, I'm dyspraxic and I struggle for people that show me one thing and talk about another. So I'm basically, it's going to be fairly straightforward. So let's begin. Is it going to work? Aha, yeah. Okay, I think it's good, right? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so the question that I started my thesis with was, what can we learn from the relationship between farmers and nature that could shape our future societies? And basically this came from when COVID hit. And I started to think, okay, how can I take a bit more control of my life and become maybe a bit more self-sufficient, or to create alternative structures which I feel happy and comfortable existing within. So I basically wanted to use this chance to build a toolkit for myself that I could use for when I finished a master's. I basically want to leave England and kind of set up somewhere else, which I feel more happy and comfortable being in, like another place, which I'm still unsure of. So I thought this could be a perfect time to research into possible places and possible scenarios which would suit me and hopefully be regenerative for myself, but also for the community around me. But as I kind of researched into the history of farming, because I thought it's good to know what is the topic I'm talking about, although my proposal was mainly scientific, like not scientific, sci-fi, speculative. So I'm projecting a future scenario, but I thought it's still good to have a little bit of context. And the more that I researched into farming and agriculture, the more depressing it got, I suppose. So I have, for example, this restoration of the expulsion from Eden, which became quite a big turning point in terms of the Bible, where we were basically pushed out of Eden and we started having to till the land. And also in terms of agriculture, bringing about hierarchical societies, which kind of led, in my opinion, to the downfall of social organization. And so I'm just going to say also what I present is a certain linear, but there are alternatives, of course. So I'm not saying this is the only way, I'm not saying these are the only theories, but these are the ones that I came across and also which fundamentally supported my thesis. So this is an overview of all of the chapters which were included. But what I'm going to talk to you about is just a few sections. So I introduce in the first chapter what my teacher called poetic interventions, which I thought sounded really fancy, so I'm holding on to that. And then I talk a bit about theory and personal experiences through chapter 2, especially about education. And yeah, this is another poetic intervention. It would normally kind of come before a section where I'm having a kind of provocative and I guess pessimistic view of our ability to have a non-colonial relationship with nature. But since the format of the presentation, I've kind of shifted that to the top just to give you a little bit of an introduction to the more fictional side, which kind of detaches from regular narratives. And then I give you more of a historical and theoretical overview. So I'm just going to read through. Protean. Also, by the way, a lot of these words I just came across while doing the thesis, and I've never had to say them out loud to anyone. So protean, protein, I don't exactly know the pronunciation, but I'm just going to go with how I read it. They entangle in an act which neither have shared before, holding each other close. Reproductive organ meets eye, socket, nose, cheek, bone, meets hand, elbow, shin, penetrates, is penetrated. At first a superficial wound before extending far beneath the surface, stretching until they engulf, until they embody, become a vessel. The others, now inside, now fluid, amalgamating until the roles reverse, until the one, once liquid, thickens into a viscous clay before solidifying into a bulbous mass, crystallized and impressive. The two, also previously liquid and totally inseparable from the one, assumes the form of a liana, a parasitic vine-like structure, clinging to the edges of the now crystalline one and reaches up through the third. The third, once vessel, trembles from the inside out. Filled to bursting, they acquire, momentarily, the shape of the one, undulating in a mixture of pleasure and pain until they can no longer bear it. They release and seep through the now porous mass beneath. Vessel becomes liquid. Liquid becomes vessel. Lover becomes parasite. Terra nullius. Until we defined you, you were nothing. In the absence of presence, inconceived and imaginary, a fallen tree, but did it make a sound? A scene rendered in real time, stretching only as far as the eye can see, constantly regenerating as we step into you, on top of you, and fading to grey behind. What other purpose could you serve beyond us? Intricate systems begin to lay up as we begin to see more, hear more. That fallen tree did make a sound, and that shining star guiding us is already dead and gone long before we were ever born. A spectacular supernova, a blink of the eye, a realization that we are not the center of the universe, that our consciousness is not the most valuable, that our synthetic biological makeups are shared and shared alike. Knowledge is being generated, being generated, being generated, being generated, but never implemented. Great power insists on great responsibility until the ego is properly plump. So that's a couple of examples of those poetic interventions which are scattered up across the dissertation itself. And I'm just going to go through, I'm literally just going to read through basically what I wrote, just presenting the research. So starting with education was the first section, the development of education in Europe for Europeans. It's impossible to introduce the formation or reformation of society without discussing the powers and systems that propagate it, which is why in order to imagine a new Eden, it's fundamental to start with education. To give some context, I'm a second generation Dominican immigrant. This is actually supposed to be here, so you're not distracted by the quote, sorry. To give some context, I'm a second generation Dominican immigrant. His grandparents are part of the Windrush generation. Having moved here in their late teens in the 1950s, this means my family has experienced the Dominican education system under British colonial rule, effectively an extension of the British education system, copy and pasted into the West Indies, and the British educational system directly from the 1970s onwards. My mum, sister and cousin all work in care, mainly children's nurseries, but also with qualifications in differently abled and neurodiverse children, adults and elderly people. My aunt works in education within the prison system, and another works with marginalised children, giving workshops, inspiration and support. So education in various institutions and contexts is a topic that's dear to my family, and it's something each of us is striving to make more inclusive and caring. From this perspective, I found it interesting to research how and why British and British colonial education is structured the way it is, and what this history uncovers about the often dysfunctional of state-run educational systems in regards to the marginalised and working class population. To take a broad historical view in this section, I refer almost exclusively to Peter Gray's article for Psychology Today, A Brief History of Education, which I'll reference, unpack and reflect upon further throughout the rest of this chapter. Interestingly, my research into the history of education led me to a widely adopted theory that education is a distinct period and place for learning outside of a child's natural instinct to learn through play came due to the advent of farming practices. The strong drives in children to play and explore presumably came about during our evolution as hunter-gatherers to serve the needs of education. Adults in hunter-gatherer cultures allow children almost unlimited freedom to play and explore on their own because they recognize that those activities are children's natural ways of learning. Gray continues to explain that the development of the educational systems we are now so accustomed to in direct relation to agriculture. Due to the formation of their ever-expanding families, children were required to complete repetitive, low-skilled tasks, tending to and harvesting crops. This introduced a hard-line border between work and play, as it refused children the ability to explore freely and occupy themselves with whatever they desired. Over the course of this transition, people that didn't own land became dependent on those that did. Systems of slavery and other forms of servitude developed. Those with wealth could become even wealthier with the help of others who depended on them for survival. The principal lessons that children had to learn were obedience, suppression of their own will, and the show of reverence towards lords and masters. A rebellious spirit could well result in death. With the rise of industry in the bourgeoisie, labour moved from the field to the factory, which in turn moved from the factory to the classroom. As industry progressed and became somewhat more automated, the need for child labour declined in some parts of the world. The idea began to spread that childhood should be a time for learning, and schools for children were developed as places of learning. The idea and practice of universal compulsory education developed gradually in Europe from the early 16th century on into the 19th. It was an idea that had so many supporters who all had their own agendas concerning the lessons that children should learn. Protestant religions pushed for literacy to indoctrinate the masses, which aligned with the ideals of national leaders who saw the value in creating good patriots, who could then function as effective soldiers. To them, the crucial lessons were about the glories of the fatherland, the wondrous achievements and moral virtues of the nation's founders and leaders, and the necessity to defend the nation from evil forces elsewhere. Though the militant and religious enforcement of education loosened up greatly throughout the 19th and 20th century, a lot of the core issues of education as an indoctrination into society are still practiced today. Reflecting on the current Black Lives Matter protests and the demands for a more representative world history, we can see that the role of education as propaganda permeates still to this day. creating a false sense of historical context on a global scale. When talking with my aunt about her experiences of education, she explained that the only Black history they had was in the form of videos of starving children in Africa. The curriculum literally built on the narrative of Africa as a poor and starving nation, with no context as to the role Europe played through colonialism and slavery, nor to the existence of variations across the continent of Africa or Africa's cultural and ancient histories. The sheer lack of historical and contemporary reality and representation within our education systems can be traced back to its conception as a form and source of forced labour and the predominant power of Western indoctrination. Our future deserves an honest account of the past, which demands accountability and inclusivity. So that was the first section. By the way, also, because I can't really see anyone, if you're following, if something is an issue, maybe someone can just shout like, hey, stop, and then I'll go for it. So the next section, holding education accountable, colonialism, oppression, and the global impact of European educational systems. Education has been and continues to be a fundamental colonial tool used to assert and maintain control over the colonized and oppressed. Though it's impossible to generalize on the content and quality of the education systems between the colonies, as evidenced through Aparna Basu's 6 reasons for the introduction of education, it is agreed that the intentions, at least, have been fairly consistent. So these are a few points that Aparna Basu highlights in her text, Colonial Education, a Comparative Approach, which is really interesting. And I do believe that we're organizing a reading list for afterwards where I can share links to these resources. Once the dominant powers had established their military supremacy, a new order, a civil society, had to be created and coercion had to be replaced or supplemented by persuasion. It was necessary for the rulers to create a class of collaborators between them and those who they governed. Since there was a cultural gap between the rulers and the ruled, it was difficult to do so unless the two developed a common language of communication. There had to be a homogeneous cultural space over which persuasion and coercion could operate. In the establishment of this hegemonic power, education played a crucial role. Education was supposed to reinforce culturally what the colonial policies aimed at achieving economically and politically. It becomes clear that education is utilized as a tool of control and suppression, not just within the empire, but extending to their colonies. In these circumstances, Basu explains, education allowed empires not only to control their colonies remotely, but also to profit for them directly by exploiting the cheap agricultural labor in place of slavery in the European economic system. Here, the inextricable links between colonialism, education, and capitalism are drawn between empirical power, marginalized laborers, and environmental and economic exploitation. Put bluntly, Basu states that colonial systems have been accused of being little more than tools used by capitalists to exploit the underdeveloped world and to keep people in subjugation. These practices exist in varying intensities across the globe. The closest and most personal example to me would be that of English colonial rule in the West Indies and the life of my grandparents. They were born and raised in Dominica, which only gained independence in 1967, meaning that education was in the English language and consisted purely of British culture, traditions, and values, a system set up to indoctrinate citizens into a society over 4,000 miles away. This educational infrastructure meant that the British government had thousands of potential workers at their disposal, which they infamously utilized during the period between 1948 and 1973. Boatloads of adults and children were taken from the West Indian colonies to the United Kingdom to help rebuild the country, following the Second World War, later to be known as the Windrush generation. This was the period that my grandparents moved to the United Kingdom with their families, a country that they'd always been a resident of, but had never physically been. Through the education they received as children, having the opportunity to move to England was the best thing they could do, and they were excited and inspired by the possibilities. But it wasn't long before they experienced immense verbal, physical, and systemic racism. They were overworked, underpaid, and constantly harassed. The imagination instilled through education and the reality of the lived experience didn't align at any level. Their new Eden was a trap. Fast forward to the education of my mother's generation in Britain in the 1970s and 80s, where the general lack of support, acknowledgement, and guidance for Black students resulted in their underachievement. And, as proven through the research of Fazia Demi and Christabel McLean, these social and structural issues continue to negatively impact the Black Caribbean student population today through various factors, including head teachers' poor leadership on equality issues, teachers' low expectations, curriculum relevance and barriers, lack of diversity in the workforce, lack of targeted support, negative peer pressure, cultural clashes and behaviour, exclusions, issues and racial equality, school ability grouping and lower tier entry issues, labelling of pupils and issues with grade predictions. So these are all taken from a study from the Lambeth Education and Learning Organisation in 2018, I believe. These issues at an educational level combine with wider social issues such as institutional racism, class issues, cultural and identity issues, media negative picture stereotyping, police stop and search and its negative impact on race issues. The pressure of the government school standard agenda, recruitment and training issues of teachers, lack of role models and peer pressure. These categories, though not extensive, outline a myriad of issues which even the most agile student would find it possible to navigate unscathed. As such, the school system, rather than being a place of inspiration and world-building, proves to be nothing but a microcosm, whereby extremely damaging societal issues are reenacted and reinforced at the expense of Black and otherwise marginalised students. The educational system spanning colonial era Britain to today are quite clearly and very deeply flawed. In order to progress in any way, education needs an honest and complete re-evaluation. Taking theoretical and practical lead from bell hooks and Adrienne Marie Brown, as well as reflecting on a conversation with my aunt about her experience of education in the UK, I propose the function of the future farmer education to be one that centres connection, community, and self. Form and function of this new education would hark back to hunter-gatherers, indistinguishable from play in the formative years, the result of this being no predefined standard of expectation from formal educational organisms. Education becomes reactionary and relies on the transference of skills and intuition of students and facilitators. In essence, education becomes more about informing society on the new directions they'll be taking by consulting the source, new life bringing new energies, new vibrations and possibilities, as opposed to society informing new life on how it should function. Or I should also reference Erykah Badu as an influence for this, how she's always on Instagram talking about how kids bring her new vibrations. I think it's a really inspiring way to look at it. Educational organisms adapt, shift and merge to accommodate their students whom vary in age, character and interest. Classrooms no longer exist as lessons are hosted in the field, where and when possible. Theory without practice is off the table. This is not to say history is sacrificed. History is extensively archived through traditional as well as novel means, encrypted in DNA, activated through hormonal stimulus, just as a specific smell has the power to transport us to a certain space and time. The ever-flowing collage of life events become layers seamlessly aligned, yet completely disjointed from the individual's personal experience. The spirits of histories live in enchanted objects. These are some examples of education which centers connection, community, and self. Constantly check in and check out of reality, and I kind of propose alternatives which sometimes are based on actual real workable solutions, and other times complete speculations. It does get more and more sci-fi as it goes through, and these are some books I would definitely recommend to read. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was incredible and definitely gave us so much to think about. As an NQT myself, a teacher of art and design, I'm very, very much in this mindset right now and just trying to think of new models and how one person can kind of influence any kind of structure, if at all. So thank you for that. We will move into some questions now. We've got about 11 minutes. We have Rotimi here, who is our moderator. So if you do have anything to say, any comments, any questions, please do type those out in the chat or put your hand up, something like that, and Rotimi can come to you guys. So yeah, thank you, Josh. All good? Okay, amazing. Okay, so what we might do is have a little bit of a break. and then rejoin at what time, Hamid? When are we coming back in? Let's just double check. We can rejoin next for Evan's lecture, which will be starting at, is it 1:45? Let me just double check. Sorry, 1 second.
It's 12.
12, awesome,
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we will have the lecture by Evan at 12, and we will do an introduction to Evan as well when we return. So can everybody be back promptly on time? And in the meantime, get a drink, refreshments, anything like that. We'll see you back. Thank you, Josh. Put that on me.
Can I just say something? Just because I didn't get to chat with you before. You know, when you're doing the intro, please
Yes, hi.
don't read my whole bio.
All right, sure.
Do that.
We won't. No problem.
Yes.
No
Just
problem.
say my name, and you know, I can do the rest.
Okay.
Yeah, I find it really awkward when
Yeah.
read the whole bio.
Yeah. It does get a bit like CV-ish, doesn't it?
Yeah.
No, that's fine. No problem. Hamid, are we good for that? I think Hamid will do intro. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to get a cup of tea. I'll be right back. Josh, that was incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me as well.
That's really given us a lot to think about. And we can definitely find a way to format everything so that any suggestions can be presented to everybody. Okay,
Awesome.
BRB.
Actually, yeah, Josh, so thank you. I was gonna, just in case you're not sticking around, there's definitely some parallels between our conversations, and I actually did my MA at RCA as well. So,
Okay.
Yeah. So it's interesting, you had to think about the thesis that I wrote, which I talk about a little bit, in relation to what you shared. So yeah, I hope you stick around.
Nice. Yeah, no, I'm definitely sticking around. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Okay, brilliant.
Which course did you take?
I did contemporary art practice. So I did a year in performance, hated it, didn't get on with my tutor, and then moved to moving image.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
But it was contemporary art practice.
Yeah, that's where I'm going next year. Actually, I'm switching from Viscom to contemporary art practice, and now performance doesn't exist anymore. So I've basically split that across all three.
The guy who ran that course was a demon, and that's like
shit.
much credit actually. I'm not gonna get into all that right now, but yeah, good to meet you.
You too.
Okay. Josh, someone has asked, there was a book at the end of the chat, which they didn't catch.
Okay.
I'll put screen sharing on again. Could you put that back up?
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe we could send a follow-up email to this session to everyone with some resources,
Yeah.
like a list of readings that you recommend, Josh, and anything that comes up with Evan's lecture as well. So maybe we could compile that at the end.
Cool.
Of
Yeah.
course, you can share now as well.
Yeah, I'll just leave it on there for now anyway, but definitely up for sharing those by email too. So this was it. Because on mine it's kind of blocked by the people. Can you see it? Can anyone see that? Maybe I make it smaller like this. Oh wait, what does that mean? Sharing is paused. Resume share. I don't know. Can people see that?
I could see it at the start and then it kind of just disappeared.
Yeah, why is it doing that? Sharing is paused. Hang on a second. Okay, now it's working. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it like this.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's really awesome.
So everyone, you can just leave the Zoom on mute and turn your video off for now. I'm gonna little break, and then when we come back, we can just like unmute. So I wasn't
Perfect.
ready.
Thank you. I've been reading Bell Hooks' Teaching to Transgress, and it's just it blew my mind.
Yeah.
It absolutely blew my mind.
Yeah, it's on my list, like all three of them, because there's also the latest one, I think, that she released in 2014. I can't remember.
No way.
3 in the series, yeah.
Oh,
And
amazing.
it's so good.
Is this, oh no, it's a different one. Oh, I need to find this. I've been meaning to read Teaching Community as well, so I'll definitely get onto that. But even All About Love kind of touches on some like
I haven't read
elements of education as well. It's really interesting just to see how like love is a thread that has run throughout every aspect of life, either the lack of or the practice of, I guess. And it's just so interesting. It completely transformed my thinking about how to be a teacher as well. So
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely like fundamental. And I literally just came across it now and I'm really like, oh, what the fuck?
I know. Where have you been? That's how I feel. I feel the same way. But I've never, I've been meaning to read Dawn as well.
Dawn is so
really great.
Because I started with Parable of the Sower. Of course, it's
Okay.
amazing, but I wanted aliens. And so when I got this one, I was like, okay, there we go.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. There's somebody else. Oh, I can't even remember the name, but it's a Jamaican writer, and they're writing about like kind of pre-colonial Africa as kind of this imagined space. I can't remember his name. Marlon something.
Okay.
Do you know what? I'm going to find it. 1 second.
Yeah, great.
Sorry, Josh.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to thank you so much for your presentation. And I was just wondering whether during your research you looked into indigenous communities, for example, and the way in which they produce knowledge that's not usually documented, but that's a different avenue of looking into how education can and should look like.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I did, definitely. I looked into also like social structures, but the issue which I was basically kind of warned away from, which I'm also grateful for, by my tutor, who's also an anthropologist, of basically the way that we apply logic to these structures from our Western perspective is always going to be degraded. And it's never, even if you live there from like 12 to the rest of your life, you're never really going to actually understand what's going on. So I didn't feel like I had the authority to talk about or even introduce those topics, although I am definitely aware that there are much more variations which still practice today. But there's also really interesting, like Tuck and Yang, they wrote this text, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. And in general, they write a lot of text about education systems, also social reform in regards to, she's from an indigenous tribe in Alaska, in terms of the indigenous experience. And again, it's talking about how this experience of also being affected by colonialism, but as the indigenous person by settlers, because also in effect we are colonial settlers because we've taken land which isn't ours, although we were forced to. For example, the Caribbean islands, that was native Carib before we were there, from West African slaves. So it's really, it did become for me a bit of a tricky point to talk about indigenous experience when we also, although we never chose to, we also do kind of enforce those structures just by existing, by the way that white people have placed us on their spaces. But it's a very good point. I don't know if you had any references that I could maybe check out, because I'm definitely interested in them.
Things I have to look into, because I went to an exhibition in Paris, and it was a photographer actually, and I liked the idea that she approached understanding this indigenous community in Brazil, and she used photography, and she spent so many years, like decades with them, actually exploring and learning with them. And I thought that was really interesting. Instead of like learning about them, it was more of a power with situation of exploration and understanding of a mutual relationship, just as opposed to her just having this gaze I'll look for her name and then I'll pass it on to you in
That
the
would
chat
be
or
great.
something.
Yeah, because I'm actually looking or trying to figure out ways of acquiring this knowledge without kind of following this colonial or tourist approach, and to have positive reinforcements would be great, because I don't really know of much in terms of anthropology or even creative projects. So yeah, I would really appreciate if you
for sure.
Thank you.
So, just to note, this is the book
Oh,
Black Leopard, Red Wolf, Marlon James.
Okay, I have heard
Really
of it.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nikita, for that. Really, really awesome book.
Yeah, I've been meaning to read that actually, because I loved the brief history of 7 killings. It's incredible. He's such an amazing writer, and I saw this in the bookstore, and because it's a fantasy book, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah. It's really awesome, and I just love the idea of kind of, I don't know, as a kid I never really was into fantasy structures or kind of like sci-fi, because I never saw myself. Well, there's that, but also I just felt so disengaged. I just didn't really comprehend that there was a space for me to imagine in that world. So I think literature is a really great way for me to kind of start getting into it, because I've always been a reader, so it's just a really nice entry point as well. But also presentations, because I think being able to read along as well as hearing your voice, Josh, was really powerful actually. And there was just so many points that I was just like, yes, this makes so much sense.
Nice, thank you.
So
also if you had any feedback in general, because as I said, it's the first time I do it, so it doesn't have to be now on the live, but
no worries.
I would definitely appreciate feedback.
Of course, for sure, I will.
But yeah, I also completely agree with this, like the inability to kind of connect to the fantasy structures and stories. And I think I started, actually, it should also be on here, but reading Afrofuturism by Tasha Womack.
Okay, I gotta get onto that.
Yeah, really, really good book, which I've actually got it somewhere. Which is actually what led me to Octavia Butler and Edwin Murray Brown, because Edwin Murray Brown is basically like solidifying them within social justice movements, like the fantasy structures. And I was like, okay, there's actually a power that can help in the day-to-day life of now by imagining.
Right, exactly.
And also actually this whole idea, I think Ursula Le Guin says about like the imagination battle and how it's just to be able to imagine alternatives, like that is a struggle in itself for so many people, especially press who have never been able to imagine anything other than just getting on with their life and making it work. So yeah, I think fiction definitely has a really strong place in world building in general.
Absolutely. No, I agree 100%. I think especially in regards to like recent uprisings and everything that's been happening, it's been so hard to remove the blinkers in that sense of like just seeing more than what is in front of us. Sweatshirt actually he's a rapper in LA, he had a really good tweet, I think, where he spoke about us like kind of imagining a plane whilst building it, something like that. We're kind of like we're on this journey, but we're also like trying to lay the steps out in front of us and build this machine around us at the same time. It's crazy. Yeah, that's really good.
It's funny because I've actually been thinking about that so much lately, about imagination. I think especially with this period in the last couple of months, personally, I felt this lack of agency, this lack of power, and been really low, and realizing that it stems again from a really deep lack of belief that anything could be different from what it is, especially when we're thinking about structures, economic structures, the relationship between economic justice and climate change, and racism and homophobia, etc. And I'm part of this reading group where we spoke about radical movements as given us tools for imagination, about queer theory, for example, like seeing non-binary not just as an identity, but as a radical way of looking at the world. And that's so, honestly, it was such a movement about like how we can, even our language restricts us and prevents us from being able to think about things alternatively, but we have so many tools. And in your presentation you said something about knowledge is always being generated but never implemented. And that really resonated because there's so much knowledge, but we're not imagining, we're not using. Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting what you say about language, because I also did actually a performance piece about patois, like the language spoken by my grandparents, and about how it was basically like they built or created this language from bits and pieces they heard as slaves from the French settlers, and kind of created their own language from it, and talking about how the reputation it got globally of being like a broken language, like it's called broken French, you know, and I'm kind of like, what's broken about it? For me, it's like, it's magical. They've built something amazing, and they've structured it like they actually, with their identities were basically stripped from the moment that they weren't allowed to read and write and talk to each other. And then they had to like rebuild it, and how language, just as much as taking land, colonizers also took language and then took thought with it. And again, in my dissertation, like in the full dissertation, I have a section I can actually show you, I guess, where I do redefine certain words.
That's really cool.
Which is like, kind of, again, like a tool of fictioning, which can detract from like the real structures. So this section here, biodegradable, fluid, flexible, queer future, and I kind of like go in and I kind of like define or redefine them. So like biodegradable, reabsorbed without the addition of external human energy, similar to self-cannibalism, autodegradable, compost and mulch. And then I have like I go into it a little bit. And then fluid, feminine energy, dynamic, expansive, fluid potentially with the opportunity to sink or swim. And then again, some examples. And then flexible, not rigid, sturdy, stubborn, defined, taken by surprise. Queer, which queer actually was, I wanted it to be a bigger section, but I left it till last. I was like, I can talk about queer, I am queer. And then by the end I was like, fuck, what am I gonna add? So in the end, it just got a little definition, which basically is saying like every time you define it, it changes. And then a product of the imagination. And so like being able to just like redefine words for yourself and to set them out, like what does it mean and how do I reflect on that? It's also like a really powerful tool. I'm going to stop sharing now, I think. But yeah, with queer theory also, it's I was reading No Future by Lee Edelman, which it's one of them books where it's like it's a bit too much, it's a bit over the top.
Oh yeah.
Like just so many words, and it's like, but what are you saying? But it's talking basically about the death drive, which I think was a Freudian or Lacanian like theory. Of how basically we want to return to the thing that we were before we were alive, which is nothing, which is elements, which is kind of scattered around the world. And talking about how queer people, because of not reproducing, they're basically like bringing about the death of the human species. Like if everyone was queer, no one reproduced. He's taking it, of course, to an extreme, but it's intentionally provocative. And basically like putting them together, like maybe it's good that we don't like place all of our future in the children, because then it's going to actually make us implement a change now. So that's kind of, at least as far as I got in the book, that's how he talks about it. Like it's a hard to cut stance, but also it's really interesting. Yeah, I can write that in the chat.
No, that's really cool. That's a really good reference. Please do. I would love to read that. And it's true. I feel like there's so much kind of hope projected onto the children, the future. But it's like, actually, if we are teaching the children the same things that we've embedded and internalized, then where is that happening? How is that happening?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's really cool. Okay, we have about 6 minutes. Everyone should be refreshing, hopefully. I'll be right back.
If I could just mention something real quick, Josh, I think it is. Yeah. Sorry. I'm also based in Chicago, so it's like super early over here. But I just think like what you're mentioning about like language as well being revolutionary. I took a class a few years ago and you were speaking on patois, I believe. I have some down my lineage on my father's side. We're from the West Indies, I believe, St. Kitts and Nevis. And unfortunately, that's one thing that for a long time I probably envied, looking at people from over in Europe and like London, you have maybe a closer tie with your history, and that's like more drastically cut off for me. But looking at Ebonics, which is like the language of broken English here in America, and how like that's really heavily spoken in Black communities. And we were talking about that at my class. I go to school at DePaul University in Chicago.
Nice.
And being in a class full of white kids, being the Black kid who's also speaking, standard American formal English with them, and having to explain to them like Ebonics, it almost is like a performance. I had that performance, that actual performance, but I was in the classroom almost giving a performance of how like my cousins talk to me, and how I have to like code switch, go from like back and forth to be able to communicate with the world that I exist in. So just to remind me of that. But
yeah, definitely. It's really interesting. I mean, for me also, it's, I think I can't generalize, but at least like with my experience and the experience of friends, it's more people from African heritage have a bigger connection because they're like often traveling back. Whereas at least for my family, when my grandparents moved here, they were like, that's it, we're in England. And they didn't use patois really anymore because they were like, we want to be English. And I think it's a thing of like trying to fit in. So this performance was also for me a way of kind of trying to reconnect or to understand what happens when I kind of like overlay my life and what their life is or experiences were, because the initial idea was for them to actually translate my poem, which was a different one, into patois, and for me to read it and just to see like what happens when it's like a video of me dancing in their language, and like just to understand for myself. But then they basically explained like they can't because they were never taught to read and write. So it's impossible for them to translate anything or to get anything down. And they didn't use patois in a poetic sense. It was really like communication between the family at home. So it's really interesting, like how language shifts and change. And I can imagine definitely like in the States, it's also
crazy.
And
it's also you being a dancer as well. My mother's a dancer, so just growing up with that and seeing that as a language, like a visual language, being able to display with your body, and definitely with a language that's far removed from you, being able to use your body to convey that seems like it just makes sense in your head. But that's beautiful.
Because it's also about how you communicate and how you what do you consider to be knowledge, like in the West we consider like writing in books and archives to be knowledge, but that's not the fact for everyone, and it's not always been the fact.
For sure.
So like movement, performance, masks, like you say about black skin, white masks, but masks in general has also been like a really rich cultural and historical object. So
definitely. No, you should definitely check out that book. I'm currently reading it right now, but you'll definitely realize a lot of similarities in terms of what you're speaking on.
Awesome. As soon as this is done, actually I'm gonna order it so I don't forget.
All right, for sure. I love him. He's from Martinique as well, so like definitely a revolutionary in all terms, all sense. So
nice. I think I did read like a short excerpt from something of his. It was. I don't think it was from that book. It was something else.
All right, for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you again.
Nice. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. I've actually decided to kind of forego the introduction, really, because I want to let the ideas, the work speak for itself. But what I will say is that I consider myself to be an artist and energy worker. And, I also happen to teach. I teach and have taught in a number of different contexts over the last 15 years. And I've consistently taught whilst learning. So even when I'm in a space of learning, I'm often also teaching. So I've taught in youth centres, pupil referral units, and universities. Like I now am I hold a post at Goldsmiths, but I'm not going to go into all the drama of that. But there's some drama right now that I'm not going to going to go into, but maybe, you know, if we want to talk about it in the questions, we can. But actually, what I'd really like to do before I get into it is I just want us all to ground ourselves where we are. So physically, if you can, just access the ground. You know, if you can place your feet on the ground. Yeah, for me, there's something really important about starting a session just feeling rooted into the earth. And I'm going to play just like 3 minutes of an extract of a sound work, which was part of an exhibition that I did in 2018. And it's called the breathing intro. So I'm going to play that, and we'll just have a moment just to gather ourselves, just to ground ourselves, and yeah, then I'll get going. So hopefully you can hear this.
Evan, we can't
Yeah.
hear the audio. You're gonna have to play it from you have to play
Oh,
it
you
from an
can't hear
external
it.
source. Yeah, so if you've got like speakers in the background or something to play out of that, play it from your computer.
Maybe it's because I've got my headphones on.
There we go. All good.
I was only breathing.
Okay, sorry, that wasn't quite as smooth.
Oh,
can you hear me?
Okay, you're back.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, I'm back.
Yeah,
okay.
All good.
Right. Sorry about the tech transitions just there. But so, you know, what I want to start with, or why I started with that, is because, you know, my experience as somebody who teaches and as somebody who learns is that, you know, the body is rarely centered in the space of learning, in the environment. And, I want to ask the question, what what are the ways that we can bring embodiment into our learning spaces, into our teaching environments? Because, you know, I don't want to assume that people here are one or the other, which is why I use and I'm going to use both interchangeably, because I am forever teacher and I'm forever learning. And, you know, I think we all have access to both of those spaces simultaneously. So hopefully, despite the kind of not quite smooth start, there's a feeling or a kind of awareness of your body and kind of how you're feeling, or how you might be, or what you might be bringing into the space in this moment. And, you know, I want to kind of, you know, how I'm going to do this. Again, I don't have notes. I've got a few things that I'm going to refer to, but I really just like to riff. And if I am going to draw on a text, I will try to bring it up, just because, yeah, I understand that can be helpful. But yeah, like I said, a lot of this is just going to be what's on my mind. But, you know, a question, so I'm going to start actually by, so something I've done is I've developed a few learning and teaching resources over the years. Hopefully you've all got the lesson pack, because I do provide PDFs of, I think maybe 3 learning resources. I also share a link to a video that I'm going to play an extract from today. And I also share a PDF of my MA thesis. And I will say about that I'm actually potentially going to publish it at some point. So I might not have that available indefinitely, but I did want to offer you the opportunity to read it in full if you want to after this session. But yeah, so keywords. I wanted to structure today around 5 keywords based off of, or kind of drawing on, this resource. Hopefully you can see it there. I am gonna bring up some images from it in a moment. But today I've picked 5 words that don't feature in this resource, but that I wanted to speak to today, that felt kind of resonant for what today is about for me. And the words are abundance, curriculum, embodiment, knowledge, and solidarity. So yeah, I mean, you know, I'm inviting you to think about what those words mean to you right now, and then also, you know, how your understanding of those words might shift once this hour is up. And yeah, you know, maybe that can be the starting point for our question, our Q&A. That's really up to you. I'm just offering it as a possibility. So one of the first, so keywords is structured around some words, and I think the words in here are community, experience, map, record, and sit. And it kind of breaks down these words in, through a series of, you know, anecdotes, through artworks, through questions, through conversations, and through archival material, you know, all of which are, I guess, you know, aspects that really inform my teaching practice. And, you know, there's a question that comes up, I think, quite at the beginning, you know, near the beginning of this publication. Yeah, so the question is, you know, how actually it's actually the subtitle of the text. So how do our experiences shape how we make, talk about, or interpret art? And then I want to kind of expand on that today to then ask, you know, how do we make space for other forms of knowledge to be part of the culture of conversation within education? For example, embodied or ancestral knowledge. I think those 2 forms of knowledge are the ones that I really want to kind of focus on today. Let me see, what's the next image? Okay, so this illustration is by Jacob V. Joyce, and yeah, I included it in this publication. And actually, Jacob is quoting me. So Jacob, I think, did produce the illustration as part of a zine called Fear Brown Queers in 2016. And I think they're actually quoting something that I said at a talk, maybe in 2014. I actually can't see fully what it says here, but if I recall correctly, it says, you know, I make art because I need to do so to survive in this world that would rather people like me not exist, let alone flourish. And, you know, I bring this up because, you know, these conditions are the conditions in which we arrive. You know, so I arrive in a learning environment as a student or as a teacher, already carrying this within my body, you know, already carrying this within my bones. And so how does that impact how I'm able to make work, how I'm able to show up? Yeah. You know, because I've definitely had experiences where there hasn't been space for that, you know, and for me, part of redressing the balance is ensuring that there is always. And so it's very important for me to name it, because in naming it, we can then transcend it. And then the question that also appears in the resource is, yeah, how might you do things differently tomorrow? So how do we make the space that I am so keen to have exist? And, you know, I think to kind of, you know, it's really great actually that Josh went before me, because yeah, there's a lot of resonances, you know, between our presentations, between, I think, you know, our lines of inquiry. Even when I left the room, I was still listening. And yeah, I mean, firstly, you know, I also did my MA at Royal College. It was a really traumatic experience. But, you know, I got out of it what I needed to. I produced a thesis that, you know, I'm really, really proud of and really stand behind, which I will talk a little bit about in a moment. But I found it really challenging. And actually, in the end, I didn't even do my degree show, but I still made sure they gave me the certificate. And you also, you know, Josh, you also mentioned this idea of a toolkit. And yeah, I definitely like to think about the things that I do, or when I produce resources, when I produce publications, I definitely see them as resources for people, as toolkits. You know, the things that I found really useful along the way. And, you know, I put them down on paper so that they might also be supportive for others. And actually, I want to add, you know, keywords was kind of actually a number of years of work. So in 2013, I was I can't remember what they call it now, but Tate has this like artist residency, you know, for their schools and teachers program. And I did that in 2013. And then this resource was, you know, something that was worked on 2014, 2015, and then was published, I don't know, either at the end of 2015 or the beginning of 2016. I can't remember at the top of my head, but it was actually produced while I was doing my MA. So again, it kind of demonstrates, you know, this idea that I'm constantly in the space of simultaneously learning and teaching. So I think this resource, you know, explores all of those positions at the same time. And I think for me, that's kind of the key in a way, is to never see yourself as above or beyond a role or position, but to occupy it all at the same time. But yeah, you know, this resource is really about kind of unpacking and defining these words, rather than, no, not so much defining, because I feel like defining kind of fixes something, but it's more about kind of asking questions of the words. And so that's why I kind of use them as a structure, as a framework. Okay, let me just double check I've not missed anything from that introduction. Yeah, so, you know, I've put the question, you know, did current models of art school allow for a diversity of practices to flourish? You know, what are the ways that they do or don't? And, you know, I kind of ask it almost, it's like a trick question, because it's like, no, they don't. Do you know what I mean? Like, they really, really don't. And so what do we do with that? You know, what do we do with that awareness? What do we do with that knowledge? And so, so I think I don't know. I might come back to keywords. I mean, you know, there's a lot in here. I definitely recommend, yeah, checking out the PDF, which is included in the lesson pack. I don't want to go into too many details because I do actually want to cover a lot today. But yeah, you know, if you feel like I haven't shared enough about it, like, please do come back to it in the questions. I just want to make sure I cover everything. But yeah, so my MA thesis is called Becoming Abiola on the Intimacy of Objects. Gosh, even just opening this up. Whew. So the first, actually, you know what I'm going to do? So what you're seeing now is a letter. Well, it's an email. So the way I structured my thesis it's a conversation that I'm having with a figure that you never meet, a figure called Abiola. So I think it's structured around maybe 1, 2. So there's 5 emails. There's a prologue, there's an interlude, there's an epilogue. You know what? I'm actually just gonna, I think it would be better if I can just scroll through it a little bit. So let me bring it up now. Because it is quite a visual document, my MA thesis. So this is my MA thesis. I created a plantain pattern on the front cover that you can see, and I begin with this quote. That's what frames my thesis. The history of Blackness is testament to the fact that objects can and do resist. Yeah. My thank yous. So I'm just gonna sort of scan very quickly. So I'm gonna read one of the letters, but what I wanted to highlight with this text is that, you know, for me, the practice of decolonialism, all of these things, for me, no, what I should say is I have some criticisms, I think, around the theory of how these words and terminologies are used. And for me, it's really important to think about, how do we embody, you know, how do we practice? And so I made my thesis a way of like practicing the decentering of Western empirical knowledge, in that I literally put the theory on the margins of my text. So rather than embed it as we're taught to within the context of an academic essay, I thought, no, you know, I want to center the people that really inform my work, the Black women that really inform my work, the queer people that really inform my work. And so they exist at the center. And the theory, you know, literally exists on the margins. And so it's there so that, you know, I can kind of quantify the text, you know, so I can make sure that it, you know, it has what's considered, you know, a kind of academic rigor. But I don't want to, you know, I felt like it would have contradicted my text to embed the theory. So I had to kind of literally put it on the margins. And it was a political task, in a way, to do that, to visualize that distinction. And like I said, there's a PDF of this within the lesson pack. So yeah, there's recipes. My recipe for the perfect plantain. Lots of just conversations, music. Sound is a big part of what I do, and so I found ways to embed sound also into my MA thesis. Yeah, so this is actually the letter that I wanted to read. Okay, so dear Abiola, I decided to make up 2 words yesterday. And actually it's weird because I'd planned to read this letter before I heard your talk, Josh. But again, there's resonances here. So it's really funny that you talked about redefining words and language, because I do that here. It's almost a shame that you didn't have a chance to read this. But anyway, so dear Abiola, I decided to make up 2 words yesterday. The language I've been taught is no longer sufficient. It's also part of my attempt to recover my mother tongue, Yoruba. At some point in my childhood, the conversations my mum had with her mum, my nana, on the phone stopped being spoken in this language. Growing up, I was never taught how to speak it, although on hearing it, I feel a sense of familiarity. I don't know if my mum can still speak her native tongue. She probably wouldn't admit to it, even if she could. I'd love to hear your opinion on a couple of texts I've been writing. The first is an extract from my new radio play, This Catalogue of Poses, reflecting on a moment from my childhood. Did something like this ever happen to you? The second is a write-up of the cult classic film Born in Flames, which feels pertinent to come back to at this moment in time, with the recent inception of the Black Lives Matter movement in London. I've been trying to find a copy of Passion, Discourses on Black Women's Creativity, to send to you. It's proving challenging. The book, first published in 1990, is out of print and not widely stocked in art libraries across the country. To me, it's just as crucial a text as Ways of Seeing or Mythologies. So that was kind of a little joke in a way, because they're these sort of, annoying kind of canon art history books. I do a lot of these like little shady things in my thesis, but I just want to, just to sort of make that clear what those 2 texts are. So what do we do when the books we need to read are not in our libraries? How do we find them? How do they find us? Gosh, yeah, even just reading that. And then the next page, I'm quoting, well, I've made up some words, and then at the bottom I'm quoting a book by M. Nobis Phillips, which I did include in the reading list. And there's a bit in the text where she talks about this idea of parsing, which is the exercise of dismembering language into fragmentary cells that forget to remember. Yeah, which I just found really beautiful. So that is a little something from my thesis. What time is it? Okay, I'm not going to read any more from it, but I'm just gonna. So yeah, I kind of structured it like a like a exercise book, something that's very much in process, unraveling. Referencing, bits of me getting into some beef with some people on Facebook, just, it was really just me talking about my life, talking about, what it is for me to make art, and what unravels as a result of that. Because for me, that's what art is, or that's what I want it to be. And so, yeah, I had to find a way within the academic context to, essentially justify that, to kind of say, actually, this knowledge is valid knowledge. That's it. So back to this. So yeah, we need more books on Black artists. We need more books on Black British artists. We need more books on Black women artists. We need more books on Black queer artists. We need more books on Black trans artists. We need more books on Black disabled artists. We need more books on Black artists. Yeah, okay. So, as students, do you feel that your needs are being met? As educators, do you feel resourced and supported to address these needs as they arise? Um, and it's funny actually, because this particular bit of note I actually wrote as part of a different presentation, so it hits a bit different now. But so in many art schools, the question of presence of Black and people of color lecturers is becoming one of permanence. When we are here, what positions do we occupy? Do we hold permanent posts, or are we often in the most precarious positions? Okay, and so this is a petition actually that was initiated by a couple of friends who are studying like PhDs and MAs at an art school in Vienna. And yeah, I thought it was like a really awesome thing to do, actually. They create a petition for a BPOC professorship. So I just wanted to leave that there, just a little hint, a little something, a little bit of because I think actually it's a really reasonable request, and just to give a little bit of context, actually that what I just said, I wrote even before I had, because I do actually currently hold a permanent lectureship. And, I had to, for one reason or another, put myself in a position where, I'm compromising that, because I'm realizing that me holding that position then comes at the cost of other people being able to access that position. Because often, even when we are in, we're the only one, and people think that that's enough. And actually, it's not enough. I personally, anyway, am not willing to believe that that is enough. And again, the word that comes to mind right now is to speculate. Speculation is also something that I'm very interested in. And, within my thesis, I do a lot of speculative writing. And, for me, I don't just want to speculate. I want to actually demand that something else is possible. I want to demand that actually, if I can be here, so can 5 more of my people, and so my commitment as one that does have a little crumb is to say, so how do we make more? How do we widen out the space rather than somehow feel like I'm special and unique, which I am. Don't get me wrong, I am both of those things, but I don't want that to become anyway. I'm not gonna make this all about that. Yeah, but yeah, so being Black in art school is lonely. I'm not gonna lie, it's lonely. And teaching while Black in art school is lonely too. But I'm really thankful actually to have been and to continue to be part of so many life affirming creative projects, collaborative projects, over the years. Collective Creativity, Treaty Park Arts Group, Network 11, and more recently, Black Obsidian Sound System. And so, each of these groups have sought to make Black and POC creative practitioners out in the world feel a little bit more joyful and a little bit less alone about being a creative practitioner. And I talk a bit, well, actually, no, there's quite a bit about collective creativity in the keywords resource. There's a little bit about Network 11. There's nothing about BOSS because they didn't exist in 2016. But if we have time, I might read a little bit about an essay that talks a little bit more about them. But yeah, this here is a quote from the resource. Find your community, the ones you are reflected in, the one in which you are enough. I cannot advocate enough for finding your people in this work. Either inside the institution that you might find yourself in, or maybe you got to do a bit more searching, but they're out there. You just got to believe that they are. Yeah, and for me, part of that also is about shining a light on each other, shining a light on the people who came before us. Because I think also the thing with arts education in general, I think it it really individualizes us. You know, it really kind of encourages us to compete, especially as Black folk, especially as, you know, people of color. I think, you know, when we exist in very small numbers, we often end up working against each other rather than with each other. You know, unfortunately, that has been my experience in the past. And so I do want to, you know, I want to acknowledge that. Why is it not moving? Is that the last one? Oh, okay, so collective creativity. Yeah, maybe that is the last one then. Yeah, so collective creativity is a group that I formed in collaboration with an artist called Raju Rage in 2013, 2014. I don't really remember now, to be honest. And yeah, we created it just as a forum as artists who had felt failed by our education to just talk about art. You know, as I mentioned before, at the time I was working at Tate, simultaneously actually within the learning department, you know, doing workshops and stuff, but also at the bookshop. And being the kind of the little stealthy hustler that I am, I just found that I could access the meeting rooms there. So yeah, I started holding monthly meetings at Tate. Didn't let them know, just did it, you know. And so yeah, Raju and I, you know, we would hold these meetings, and it just kind of became a thing where we started doing, you know, a lot of like archival work. We were doing a lot of research into, and actually I should say, you know, at this time there wasn't even the conversation that we're having about Black art wasn't at that point. It wasn't even like that, you know. We were like, where are we? You know, and so we were just reaching out to people. We were investigating archives. We were having conversations, inviting people, and sometimes people would show up. And so we made a video in maybe 2014, I think this was 2015, called Redefining Legacy, Navigating Emerging Practice as Artists of Color. The video, again, there's a link to the video in the resource pack. I'm going to play like the first maybe 3 minutes, and then maybe the last towards the end, maybe 3 minutes, because yeah, there's very different things that happen. And I just want to give some context to how we were working. So I think it really informs what I do now. So I'm going to switch off my headphones. I'm saying. This is not going to be a presentation as such. This is really an open discussion, conversation. So the facilitators, that'll be me, Raju, and Raisa, when she's here, we will kind of lead on with a statement or a question, and then we'll kind of open up to the floor. So one of the first questions that we posed was, what does a Black arts movement mean now to young artists working today, and also those involved in it originally?
I mean, how are you using that now? What do you feel constitutes the Black art movement?
Yeah.
Because in a sense, it was never defined at the time. And so in retrospect, I mean, how do you see it? How do you...
Yeah, okay. And yeah, I totally agree with that. I think I guess I think about that in terms of how it's been presented in terms of, you know, literature, books, things like that. So I guess when it's been written about, rather than kind of the artists themselves, I guess would have, you know, they probably wouldn't have considered it a movement. And yeah, maybe it is even a problematic term to kind of conflate.
people who didn't necessarily actually identify with each other than the fact that they were Black. But this is actually part of the conversation, I think. Yeah.
I think for me, it's been really, like, I was art schooled. I came out of art school in 2000, and even at that point, I wasn't aware of the Black Arts Movement. So I think for me, it was really important to kind of to see that there was some sort of movement, whether or not, you know, in reality, that was, if it's perceived in a different way. And I think that was kind of the first entry point to that. Well, for me, I feel like it was important to kind of, that it existed, because I feel in collectivity, comes some kind of empowerment. But then to kind of, to just look back at it kind of romantically, or, you know, without hearing directly from people who experienced that, what that was really about, is limiting. So I think that's why we would like to have this conversation today.
You know, going back to the 70s and 80s when I was growing up in the Midlands, we used this term Black, and it meant all of us, you know. So it you know, it came out of like the riots that were going on, and you know, and as artists we were able to come together and work together, and quite often our artwork was quite political, it was quite activist as well. And then you know, there were loads of kind of conflict, there were loads of debates. I wrote this area in the 80s, in the early 80s, and there started to be divisions within the communities, and that got lost.
This was a group of people making work, and that latterly it comes to be known as the Black Arts Movement. So it's more than saying, once you look at art history, you sort of say, well, what happens in these specific discrete periods? And if you say, well, at this point in time, there's this idea of a Black Arts Movement, and there's the idea that this Black Arts Movement symbolises certain things that aren't necessarily coming out of the mouths of the people involved in that movement, then I think that's right for critique, and it's right to say, well, what were they supposed, what supposedly was this movement supposed to achieve, and has it been achieved, and where can we go from here? So it wasn't dismantling what happened before, it was saying, that's there, let's build on it by doing something else. I do think it's, you know,
kind of projected onto the Black figure and the Black communities.
We're definitely going to keep this going. Okay, so yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing.
So I guess we wanted to start by asking you about this archive, how it came to be, what your intentions were with setting it up, and also how it came to exist within the space, within the university.
So Susan, in fact, thought it would be a very good idea to have a collection of all the exhibition materials, you know, invites, statements, reviews, some images, that all the members of staff had. So in other words, their kind of website, that there wasn't such a thing, in a box. In my house, I had all these books, all these letters, exhibition materials, magazines, everything. I have got a big house, but I didn't really want it to surround me the whole time, because if you've read through them, which I have to admit, actually, you've probably read more of that stuff in recent years as opposed to at the time than I have. So there comes a point at which actually you don't really want to read it, because what can you do about it? So I really have reached a pitch where, which is how I get with my work sometimes, where I want to just throw it away, really, take up tons of space, what am I going to do with it, what use is it? So I said, look, I think I want to chuck all this stuff. And Susan said, I don't think so. Why don't we transfer all that from, you know, in its various, fairly organised way, but not like it is in those grey boxes, from the house to here. So that's when we kind of really set up the Making History Visible project, specifically to say, in a modest kind of way, this is the sort of thing we're doing. And within what we're trying to do, how we're kind of trying to shift the perception of what Black artists are doing or who they are now. We have some material that's to do with men, because I was very anxious that people of 25, 35 didn't think they had to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Because it's depressing to find that you're doing the same thing when you didn't need to do it. And all I want to say, don't bother doing that. We've done that, and you just have to point at these archives and say, look, they were doing that in the 1980s. We're not doing that now. They called themselves that in the 1980s. We don't want to call ourselves that now. These are our agendas. These are their agendas. That's fine. We think they're okay, or we think they're not okay. But this is what we want to do now.
And okay.
I haven't watched that in a while, so it's really nice to see that again and see that conversation with Lubena and just kind of look at and think about how much has shifted, since that time, since this point, Lubena's like won the Turner Prize, and like, her career's really like kind of shot off again in a big way, but she was always making, she never stopped. And actually I talk a bit more about the relationship that I have with Lubena in my thesis, because she's definitely somebody that I am really fortunate enough to consider a mentor. And I talk a bit actually about our first meeting, and how she gave me a copy of Thin Black Lines, the exhibition catalogue, and how that's been really pivotal for me. And so the video sort of draws on some of the work that I'd been doing with Collective Creativity, who apologies, I realized I didn't name the members, so it's myself, Raji Rage, Raisa Kabir, and Rudy Lowe, who wasn't present for those conversations, but is very much involved and is part of the Keywords resource. So I just want to acknowledge and name, because they very much are, the reason why this work is possible. And I wanted to move on to talk a little bit about a resource that Collective Creativity and I went on to produce together, called Surviving Art School, an Artist of Color Toolkit. So this we made in 2016, I believe, in collaboration with Nottingham Contemporary, because actually, no, it hadn't happened. Okay, no, so there was a Glenn Ligon exhibition, because I was thinking the places here, I hope folks got to see that show, but actually that show came even 2 years after this. But so we did a conversation with some of the key figures in the movement, so like Claudette Johnson, Keith Piper, Said Idris, who are all from Nottingham, are from that region, and actually haven't or hadn't at that point really been acknowledged at all by the university, their presence. So we did a conversation with them, and I believe a transcript of that is in this resource. And we also did a workshop with some art students at the university. And so I wanted to, and again, I'm just going to do a quick flick through because I want to read. So one of the activities that we did as part of the workshop was we invited participants and ourselves to write a letter to a future younger self. And actually that's also an activity in the Keywords resource. So I'm gonna read this letter to you. Dear Evan, I'm writing this to let you know about a book I'd wish I'd known about when I was studying at Winchester. It's called Passion, Discourses on Black Women's Creativity. See, this book is like, I'm always going on about this book within but within education, because I just feel like it's a really important book to read. So I think if you had known about it then, you wouldn't have felt so lonely. You would, in a sense, because you would have still been surrounded by middle-class whiteness, but at least you would have known that artists with passion, energy, and drive, who were coming from a similar position as you, existed. You would have learned about the work of amazing artists such as Lubaina Hamid and Ingrid Pollard. You were already aware of Maud Salter because of the Circus series, but you didn't know about the movement that they had created, the pivotal bringing together and organizing of Black female artists' work. It would have helped you to hear about their struggles and persistence, and it will help you to keep going when you feel like you can't anymore. With love, Evan, a future you. Okay, yeah, and then so there's a link to the PDF of that. I'm not gonna go through the whole thing. Okay, so I'm gonna stay with the subject of finding your community, finding your people, and I want to go to this essay. That's what I want to do now. So I'm just making it up as I'm going along. Right. So So what kind of the question of what art is, what it can be, what it can look like, what it can do. I think is a question that, at least for me within my arts education, wasn't really unpacked enough. Well, definitely not within my BA. It was very kind of object oriented. You make things to go in spaces, and something about that never really sat right with me. And yeah, I know there's performance, but there's still this very much you're this thing there to be consumed. And in 2017, I was invited to produce my first solo show in London, and in 2018 it was presented at Gasworks. And as part of that show, I decided to okay, so I guess I should give a bit of context. Okay, so from around 2015, 16, 17, I was doing a lot of archival research. I mean, I'm always doing a lot of archival research, but in particular, I was looking at Black, queer, female, non-binary led social centers. So I was looking at the disappearance of the social center, the space where, one's politics and pleasure might occupy the same space. And, I was looking into how, at that point, a lot of these social centers, were the space, where people were organized, but it would also be where people were partying and playing. And I was really interested in that as a site. And so people get it a little bit mixed up because they often think, oh, this work is about club culture. And it's no, not at all. That is a bit of a misnomer in some ways. But, as a result of the research and the conversations I was having, I did meet people who ran, Black women who ran and still run, sound systems. And I was really inspired by that, because I think, clubbing in London, I mean, it's a bit dreary, to be honest, but I remember at this point, people were doing some stuff was happening, but something I noticed, somebody who's got a very, is very interested in sound, is that the quality of sound in the space was really compromised. Often if, Black folk were putting on events, it's you find the space that feels right, but the sound system never quite does the job. And so when I was invited to do this show, I knew I wanted to make a sound work. And I thought, well, if I'm going to make a sound work, why don't I just make the whole sound system, and to give a bit of further context, before this show, I'd made a moving image work called, so this was in 2016, called She Was a Full Body Speaker. So the speaker, is an object, is a a symbol that has existed in my work for a few years now. And I talk about that to start this essay. And it is, again, there's a link to it in the resource. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I want to move on to talk about Black Obsidian sound system. So what bit should I read? Okay, so gonna skip through all of that. But so the sound system was built by hand over a number of weeks with a group of people leading this design and build. James Bunton, Kira Cowadale, and Nick Sigsworth. Collaborating on the build were Naeem Davis, Shanice LeBird, otherwise known as Aretha, Natasha Conde, Shai Wan, Jin Wilson, a group of Black, queer, female, non-binary creatives working in sound and live events. It was built with the intention that the system would become a community resource after the exhibition. I didn't want the system to be built from scratch to merely become an art object. I wanted it to be able to proliferate beyond the exhibition context. I saw it as a gift to my community, an offering that I am now realizing requires a lot of work to sustain and nurture. But this exhibition moment at Gasworks planted the seeds that allowed for it to grow. The sound system, now called Black Obsidian Sound System, because it didn't have a name when it was in the show, continues to live on independently of the exhibition as a collectively run enterprise that has its own Instagram. I don't know why that's funny to me. Yeah, okay. So, and actually, I was a little bit cheeky because this little section here just is actually me drawing on something, or the essay that I wrote about Born in Flames from my MA thesis. So if you read both, you'll see that I'm literally I've taken a bit of text. So we have come to occupy your frequencies. So BOSS exists because of films such as Born in Flames, 1983, and Black women-led sound systems such as Nzinga Sounds, Sister Culture, and Systematic. Like the folks at Radio Regaza in Born in Flames, our marginal status is what has brought us together as a collective, and in our individual togetherness, we have everything we need. We are abundant. The sound system is our sacred object, our totem, a symbol of our collective struggles and desire for more. Coming to life during ritual without belief, the without is strike through. I just realized I didn't even tell you the name of the exhibition, but that was the name of the exhibition. The sound system was the perfect system because it was built by my own hands and those of my community. The fact that it sounds good is a bonus. There, it truly was the definition of the right sound system in the right environment. Together now as BOSS, with the right system, we create the right environment. We do what we can to create the kind of space in which we want to exist and find joy in. BOSS lives on in honor of all those who saw and sometimes fought to make space for one's politics and pleasure to come together. And then, yeah, there's a bit more about that and some of the other contexts in which I was working. And so why did I want to talk about that? Oh, yeah, just to kind of, emphasize that, even though this, BOSS came to exist as a result of like an art thing, it was funded through arts, it came to exist through Arts Council, all of that stuff. For me, it's about so much more than art, and that's where I find a lot of pleasure and enjoyment about art is the potential for it to do more than just sit on walls. And I do talk about this in my bio, that I'm really invested in. And again, I don't know how it's something I've become quite, I guess, versed or fluent in, but this ability to redistribute and renegotiate the resources that I have at my disposal. And for me, that's also really about what abundance is, or cultivating abundant thinking. It's like, how do we work with what we've got? How do we find the resources that we need when they're not immediately in front of us? Because I'd never built a sound system before. But I believed that it was possible. So I made it possible. you know, and I'm aware that I've got 4 minutes. So what I might do to end, yeah, you know, I'm gonna read you. I don't, let me just try, sorry, I'm gonna have to just find it because I didn't plan to read it, but I want to just read you the the lyrics to a sorry, now you're going to be nosing through my stuff. I want to read you the lyrics to a song that I wrote, you know, a while back. I wrote this in like 2011 or something. It might have even been a little bit earlier, but that's definitely where I found the first document of it. So I'm gonna end with this. Did they teach you at school about the place you were born, the history that spawned you? Did you learn about how your ancestors struggled for freedom, struggled for rights, struggled for choice to create their own lives? Or was it Pete Bogman, William the Great, the Battle of Hastings, the bubonic plague, Henry VIII and all of his wives, how the Spanish flu took many lives? Look, I get it. That's history that goes by the books, but what about a history that'll explain all these looks? Is it because I was the only one in class, the only one who didn't ask why these stories spoke not of me? Did they teach you at school about the place you were born, the history that spawned you? They did, that's right. Maybe that's because you're white. Try not to get uptight as I tell you about my history. I was born in a place called Iperu. Let me spell that for you, Iperu. It's a place in the southwest of a country called Nigeria whose history is fraught with Western paranoia, hysteria. Look down at my passport. Iperu, eh? What's that like? You tell me. I have no memory of this place I'm supposed to know. But my memories are only a Google search away. They tell me nothing of the person I am today. It's not where you're going, it's where you're from that counts. The sense of something missing continues to mount inside of me. If Peru, Sagamo, Ogun State, Yoruba tribe could have been my fate. Nearest airport, Murtala Muhammad International, no notable people born of national origin. Did they teach you at school about the place you were born, the history that spawned you? Thank you, everyone.
Wow. Thank you so much, Evan, for sharing that with us. It's beautiful, very, very moving.
Oh,
very moving.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. I'm just so, beautiful and really wholesome as well. I'm really interested in how you're able to kind of survive in institution, kind of implement your world and your universe, and which should be ours, you know. How are you able to survive and keep these kinds of aspects alive?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said in the early days, it was really lonely, and you know, so I wrote through and with that loneliness, and you know, but simultaneously, I had to believe and imagine and speculate on something else being possible, you know, and speculate until it existed, you know, until I found my people. You know, like I said, I did my BA, you know, at Winchester, so I spent 16 to 9, it's 2006 to 2009, 10 there. And yeah, it was really challenging, you know, really difficult. But, you know, I was thankful that I was able to take solace in my art. And yeah, I just had to I kept visioning, and I didn't talk about Octavia E. Butler, you know, in this presentation, but, you know, the way her writing has really informed me in my work. And, you know, I was really fortunate enough to spend some of 2018 in her archive. And, you know, one of the things that's really stayed with me about that archive is, you know, as well as the manuscripts and, you know, the unpublished text, she would write these note cards to herself, these affirmations, these reminders. And yeah, that really resonates for me. I'm somebody that also does that. I write a lot of notes to myself, reminders, like, yeah, I'm really interested in, and I really believe in the power of manifestation. And yeah, I saw a lot of that mirrored in Octavia E. Butler's words and writings to herself.
Thank you.
Well done, everyone. That was dope. Just want to say, like, shout out to my people, both nationally, internationally. Just from talking today, like, you remember that when you think globally, you remember that you're not a minority.
Yeah.
And we are East, which stands for being at the same table, and we're an art collective that specializes in, creating these kind of spaces to like educate yourselves in our own art and history. So again, I want to say a massive shout out to Maye, my boy, massive shout out to Boss Lady Rochelle. May they continually build to create like a better future for all of us. Big thank you. A big thank you to Paula 198. They're true on that, in South London. Continue to support them. They put on spaces and activities and talks all the time. Definitely go through. And then again, hold tight, Josh and Evan, on sharing their pieces with us. Not think pieces, because Babylon love to diminish our work. So pieces, don't ever say the word think pieces. We're bigger than that. These are achievements and opportunities. And they've put in the time to teach us and put in the time to research. So we should like choose our language as well and we're showing appreciation. Because this is a learning space, but we're all a family. This is a village. So don't feel embarrassed or judged here. We don't do those things. Language and how we speak is a performance, it's history, it's culture and education. So take all these things into consideration when we speak to each other, So there's no such thing here as a bad question. Be yourself when you speak. All I ask is don't feel you have to dumb yourself down when speaking. If you are using more obscure terms, just like take a little time to explain those words to everyone. Not be on the same education levels when it comes to certain fields. And then, because we're all here to learn together, right? And then just be mindful of the time we take up when we speak, because to be heard is a privilege that not everyone has and not necessarily grabs with both hands, So history is, it's here. So I'm going to open up the floor to everyone and ask the first question. So, when you guys want to ask questions, just write it out in the chat and then we will look for the questions and select. Put a bracket after your question with the word S if you want to speak out loud, or put the bracket R if you want one of us to read it out for you, So first question to, Evan and Josh, if they're still here. In history, Black parents and educators have had to organize and provide supplementary learning, like such as Saturday schools, for example. What are some of the structures that were implemented and how effective do you feel they've been?
Do you mean in terms of the ones that I've been able to access growing up?
Access or being aware of.
I mean, it's definitely not the focus of my research, but I think for me, the Saturday school has come through, the church fundamentally. My background, I do come from a very religious family. I know my mum not so much, but the rest of my family is. So up until a certain age, I did go to church. I did have Saturday school. So there were certain ways in which I was indoctrinated. But even I don't want to speak bad of it, but it was also a challenging environment to be in. As somebody who, I think even from a young age was kind of queer, in terms of my presentation, I don't necessarily mean actually at that point my sexuality. So yeah, I don't know if I'm really answering the question, but yeah, I have had some experience, but and I've definitely learned from it. I've definitely learned the importance of having education that sits alongside the mainstream education. You know, I think I'm somebody that, you know, has always been schooling myself alongside. Even like when I was young, that was definitely through through music, through I had a lot of I mean, again, this is a form of informal learning, but I had a lot of like pen pals. You know, I think by the time I was 12, like the internet was a thing. And so I was actually exchanging a lot of music with people across the world, actually. I don't even know how that even came to be, but yeah, I was exchanging a lot of mixtapes, a lot of letters, a lot of magazines with people. And I think that's also why I'm sort of quite obsessive about like archival material and like rooting through and making the connections with things. Like, you know, I think, I don't know if it was clear, but for me, naming and acknowledging is very, very important, because I don't exist in a vacuum, you know. And I think that's something that kind of gets me down a little bit, you know, when I see folks out here, kind of like what Labena says, you know, often like reinventing the wheel, because you know, I think it's quite tempting. There's an allure to see ourselves as like the first, but none of us are, you know. And I think the sooner we can move beyond the need to occupy that space, then yeah, we can have a much more exciting conversation. Over to you. I'm gonna stop there.
Cool. Josh, are you still here? You will not answer that question as well. Read it.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. And the first thing that came to mind, although I don't have direct experience, was also through the church, because from my mum's generation, no one's religious, and I never went to the church growing up. But another thing I would add, which is probably also quite specific to our community, is being largely brought up by my grandparents, where my mum had to work and my mum and dad were no longer together. And this kind of learning in an intergenerational way, which not everyone actually has access to, because they wouldn't either spend time with their grandparents, or it wouldn't really be necessarily a conversation or play such a huge role in your upbringing as it has been for me and for a lot of my friends as well. So I think that's the only thing I would add in terms of learning through family.
That's dope. You know, it's funny, just from Evan speaking, I actually did think I used to go to Saturday schools now and again, different ones throughout South London. And it was cool because I did, like, you know, a lot of them were like African Caribbean. So, you know, like stuff from like the 60s, 70s. And then it was like a way of like Black parents and educators to create spaces for us to learn about our own history, which was at the time I thought was really, really good. But as I got older, I did realize a space that was meant to be inclusive of us wasn't always necessarily inclusive, you know. And, you know, so I just went to some of my church ones, or just went to some that were specifically about, you know, African spirituality and tradition beliefs, but there was still an unlearning that had to be had for some of the elders that were teaching us. And then they become off-putting at points for me, just because I didn't feel like it was encompassing Blackness in its entirety, you know, all the intersections. But I just know, it just reminded me, like, even subconsciously, I didn't realize what was going on. And it is learning that our parents need and our grandparents need, and learning that we're still going for ourselves. But, you know, that was a interesting, great interesting point. I'm gonna see if there's any questions being asked. Anyone got any questions? Okay. It's an R, so I'm gonna read it. Thank you, India. Thank you for that question. So the question is, what practices, self-care rituals do you implement in order to bring your fullest self into traditionally white-dominated spaces? Yeah, Josh, Evan, doesn't matter. You guys can.
Okay, I'll jump on though. I don't really have so much to say. I'm just kind of like saying what comes to mind. I was brought up in a village. My mum was managing a nursery in a village, so there was me, my sister, and one girl from India who were the only people of color. So from the age of 0 till 12, basically, I didn't know anyone non-white except for my family. And then in middle school, it became much more diverse, but because of what I was used to and also the side of school that I was put on, it was still largely white. And then I did my bachelor's in the Netherlands, which is very white. So for me, it's also still things that I'm coming to terms with because I'm just so used to it. And there's so many things I've internalized because since birth until like actually trying to become actively aware of how it makes me feel, I wasn't really aware of the impact that it had. So I still kind of, yeah, I'm still teaching myself. I don't actually really have an answer, but I think at least this journey towards finding the answer is maybe an interesting one to share.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I have, I have a lot of practices for that. Because yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's quite tiring work. It is. And you know, I've been sort of negotiating with these institutions and spaces for a bit of time now. So and to be honest, I do it less and less. You know, I like, for example, like I would never work with Tate again. You know, I would never. You know, I just have no. Anyway. I'm not going to get into all of that, but there's so much tea I could be spilling right now. But you know, I'm gonna just try and keep it cute and be on my best behavior today. But yeah, I mean, for me, you know, like I said right from the beginning, you know, the body, you know, I try and, you know, I start each day with some movement, some meditation, and that could even be, you know, I'll start with, I'll put on some like healing frequencies. So I'll tune into, okay, so I'm gonna give you some details, right, of my morning routine. But so I'll tune into, you know, because dream work's very important to me. You know, I try and really, I don't necessarily always remember all the details of a dream, but I try and tune into sort of where energetically a dream might have left me with a need to pay attention. And so, yeah, I'll usually start the day with some kind of healing frequencies that connect to a specific energy center or chakra, as they are also known. So, you know, I've been doing like a lot of like heart chakra, and yeah, sometimes some sacral. So I'll find, you know, frequencies for that, and then I'll have that playing out. And yeah, there'll be some movements, some yoga. I just try and, yeah, really connect with my body, just see where I'm carrying or holding any tension. Because we do, you probably can't read the notes behind here, but that's, you know, something I'm really trying to look at the moment, like where we hold tension in our bodies and like how to work through that. So before I can even begin to like intellectualize, have any kind of conversation with anyone, do any social media or anything, I need to ground in myself. I need to root in myself. That is the fundamentals of my self-care practice, you know, and I think, you know, it can look different for everyone. You know, I work a lot with different herbs and scents and smells and things. So yeah, I might burn some incense, depending on, yeah, where I'm at, whether it's cleansing or bringing in. Yeah, there's lots of different things to think about in relation to that. But you know, for me, it's so important, you know, when I'm showing up in these spaces, yeah, it's just to ensure that I'm showing up fully as myself, so that I don't succumb to projections. Because, you know, I mean, we can't help it, unfortunately, you know, unless we're kind of deep into our shadow work. But, you know, often when we're encountering people, we're not really encountering people, we're encountering our projection of them, you know. So for me, it's really just important to get very clear around myself, so that when I'm negotiating the projections, I know where to be like, hey, no, that's yours, you know, when to rebuff and when to take on. Because yeah, I'm over dealing with fuckery.
Okay, we've got that's good. No, I like that. Because I wish, no, because I'm trying to realize, I've been doing it myself, like grounding myself before I enter certain spaces, because I'll be forgetting myself sometimes and just getting like, you know, and you got to protect your energy. You really got to protect your energy. You know, I think you've gone on mute though.
No, I was just saying yes to
Yeah.
protecting energy. Yes,
Yeah.
every day, all day.
Okay, so we've got a couple questions coming through. All right. Okay. We see 3 questions here. Okay, first I'm going to start with Maxwell Murray. If you want to put your take us off of mute. If you want to turn your camera on, that's all good. You can read your question out whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I had just a few questions. The first one was kind of a continuation off the first one. With platforms such as Fantasy Saturday School, seeing that I'm based all the way over here in Chicago and had the opportunity to be able to connect with people all the way over in London and be able to talk about, something that is a worldly, not issue, but something that is going on in the minds of people all across the world. Do you think at some point that this can become something that is global, where we can have in-person and digital education system that's separated outside of, white institutions? Looking forward, is that something that you think that Black people, brown people, white people as well, all across the world can come together and envision a completely new education system that is based outside of what we already have? And then I guess my other question was also a continuation, but this idea of rest and care as a form of reparations. Do we have to work as much, seeing that we were forced to work our whole lives? Should we have the space to, be able to just sit back and think about how our minds are supposed to work, that space to decolonize our minds and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, great questions. So in terms of the first, I'm actually not sure if it's public yet, but definitely follow the Black Blossoms project by Bola, because something that she has been doing is a course in Black Girl Magic, and she did an online version, and I know that the plan now is to create a school around that, like a number of courses that can be, accessed globally. And she has invited, a bunch of different practitioners to teach a course. And I will be teaching a course next year, at the start of next year, which I'm really excited about, because it'll be the first time. I've done, lectures virtually, but I've never taught a course. So that's over the virtual space. So I'm looking forward to that. So yeah, if you're interested, look out for it. I think it will be announced any day now, actually. So in response to that one, I know that there are people thinking about that, definitely thinking about these courses. And yeah, now is the opportunity where we can reach each other across seas. The second question, I really don't like to be rushed, and I like to, I let people know that, like on my signature, I respond to emails Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Like, don't expect a response from me outside of that time. Like, I might read it, but I'm not gonna respond. So I like to have quite clear guidelines that I can fall back on, when somebody comes with some fuckery, I'm like, but I don't respond to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can rush me all you want, but I don't respond to an email on that day. So that's really helpful for me, in terms of acknowledging my need for like rest and relaxation, and I want that to be in all, I don't believe that, working has to be this, it's not that there shouldn't be some energy about it, because I like that, but I want, I set my pace, not you, and I don't mean you, I mean them. So that's definitely part of my rest practice that I let them know about, Yeah, again, it's just so important to get, because that's not, necessarily going to be the same for everyone, so I think it's a bit hard to kind of um list tips because it's so individual. And in a way, I just want to kind of go back to what I said before about grounding yourself in your own needs around like rest and care, and just being able to doing what you can to ensure that those are communicated. Something I am, thinking about working on, yeah, some kind of document, because I understand that, you know, I have a fluency now because, I've been involved in a lot of BS, and I understand that actually some of us are, we're coming into it with a different set of eyes, and, a different amount of experience. So it's definitely something I'm thinking about, as well as like how to kind of share some of this with folks. But yeah, I'm gonna let you speak, Josh, so I can get my charger. My computer's gonna.
No, I think that was amazing, and I don't really have anything to add except for the only things that I thought about when you were talking about the topic of work was one of growing up, my mum always saying like, be prepared to work double as hard as everyone else because you're going to have to get wherever you want to be. And another one being, what do we consider work? Like job, tending to yourself, to your plants, talking to friends, and why do we consider it work? And I don't know, this relationship that we have to work and production, and kind of, I think in this sense, building on these structures which are built on oppression. So reconsidering and redefining the word for ourselves, I think that's an interesting place to start.
I just add, oh, sorry. No, go, go. I think that's such a key point in terms of like reassessing what work means to us, because in a Western sense, work means labor, cheap labor, and working until your back is broken, basically working yourself into the ground, and that being sort of synonymous with productivity as well. And so in terms of thinking about like work and what work we're actually doing, a lot of the time it's never like spiritual work and like personal work is never really considered to be kind of valid as work. But that to me has become one of the most important forms of work in my life. Like that's, everything depends on that actually. And it's super urgent. So I guess, yeah, I really enjoy kind of hearing Evan talk about working only on certain days as well. Well, not working on certain days, but more so replying to emails on particular days, because you're still doing work, of course, in different ways. But it's just kind of, once we shift that kind of perspective of working in somebody else's time or on somebody else's time, I think there can be so much agency kind of reclaimed, even in just that shift in mindset. So I'm just thinking aloud, but thank you so much for that. Over to you, team.
I was going to say, rest and care, it's actually a form of rebellion. Like, when growing up, your parents were like, you got to work twice as hard to get half of what white people got. I get a certain point, I'm like, you know what? I don't want to work hard today, and I've decided I don't want to work hard today because I want to rest. Do you know what I mean? I've decided that it's lunchtime. I'm going to extend my lunch by like another half an hour, push my boundaries, so to speak, as I can, because I'm my current workplace, I'm the youngest person there. And they will tell me that, you've got to work this hard and this much before you can even earn the right to ask to work at home. I'm like, okay, Corona came. I'm working at home now. Like clearly we're proving that things can be done and systems can be changed, and it's just like, you just got to keep pushing it because it is a form of reparations. Like, my last name Sky is that it's not that for a reason, innit? Yeah, that name was like given to my family, and that like we work. People got this idea that we as Black people are lazy, like we ain't been working for free for centuries. Even like in a Black British context, the Windrush generation, for example, my grandparents came to this country after they blew themselves up for a good couple years in Europe, literally rebuilt help form the NHS, the National Healthcare System, our transport system, factories, all this labor that no one knows what to do with their hands. They came over and doing it for pennies, and then they'll talk not to complain. You should be happy and just be grateful that you had the opportunity to come over here and work. you know. So it's just like, I'm seeing my grandparents and seeing my parents work, not even get the appreciation they deserve. And I'm realizing that, you know, you're learning, because they tell us these things, that's the way they survive, you know. And sometimes you don't always want to be in survival mode, you want to be thriving, you know. So obviously when they give me some words, I listen back. You know, sometimes I talk to mom, look, my mom's, the way she is now, she could take a day off. She's taking days off. Yeah, see, the phone is going off, you know, cool me, I'm not in that mood, because it's reparations as a like care and rest is for some people that yeah, it's right, it's anti-capitalist, you know. You got to think of a way of challenging the system, and you resting and deciding to be home to work on yourself and work on everyone and work on your family, work on your craft, work on your art and your spirit, you know. That's reparations right there. They owe us that. They owe us that. I want to take a little extra half an hour at lunch. Relax, you know. I can make that up when I'm ready, because I can work smart, don't work hard, you know. Loading them things. But your first question, this is a great example of like us coming together internationally, because me as a Black person living in Britain as a minority, we're like what, less than 5% of the population. As a Black person, we're less than 2 million, you know. So like we can't always be thinking locally anyway. So we've got to reach out to our brothers and sisters in America, in the Caribbean, in Africa, you know, all over the world. You know, we've got to have alliances and build up unity. So like this is, if us in this pandemic are doing this right now, you know, we're gonna, yes, you've got to think internationally. You've got to work together, because that is the only way we're gonna. Capitalism and white supremacy, it's not local, it's global. Do you know what I mean? So like, as we're gonna be educating ourselves, we can't always just focus locally. We've got to focus on reaching out to our brothers and our sisters and our family and our friends. Like you example in Chicago, look at the time difference between here and where you are. But you know, you're waking up, putting in the work. So everyone's got to put in the work together. But yeah, sorry, I got a little rant. So
there's one from, who's the next one? Goddess Victor.
Okay. Do you want to read your question out, or should I read it?
I'll read it actually. Initially I was like, oh, I wouldn't. Cool. Let me just find it. Oh yeah. So yeah. Thank you guys for both of your lectures. They're really informative actually. And yeah. So you both mentioned language, or you used language within the work that you shared. So Josh, you mentioned patois, and then you brought up the point of like sometimes we forget that. Not that we forget, but sometimes we don't acknowledge that language was also colonized, and in some ways either language has been lost, potentially, yeah. Anyway, so my main question is, how do you both use, integrate, explore, or make space for language within your work? And do you see art as a way of preserving language in any way, in terms of languages that, yeah, either have been lost or are that can potentially be lost? So I'm the speaker of a language that's quite that isn't spoken by many people within Nigeria, so that's on the verge of potentially being extinct in a few generations. So yeah, how do you guys use language is my question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, as I mentioned, like patois has not really been passed down since my nan's generation. She basically refused to teach her children and like us, her grandchildren, because it was like a language they used for family matters, which I always assumed meant it was like secret adult stuff. So like, that's why. But then I kind of came to realize that it just was, it wasn't really the case. It was more the fact that she'd also lost connection herself to this language. My grandfather speaks it much more, but also you don't really see much of him. So yeah, interesting. Now it's as much about reclaiming as it is about reimagining, actually, and kind of proposing alternatives. I always work with language in the form of like small creative texts, like the one that I shared today. I've actually challenged myself to write something a bit longer in the same style, but just to kind of detach from what we expect these words and these formation of the words to mean, is what I think like poetry really utilizes. Using it in a more kind of emotive and yeah, imaginary way, because I don't think it has to be as defined as we're taught it has to be. That's why, like, for me, I felt a bit rebellious in the sense of writing half of my thesis as fiction or poetry, because it can, of course, be interpreted in many different ways. And it's something I had to explain in my introduction, like, why am I doing it, and what does it bring? What value does it hold in an academic institution? And I didn't really want to even consider it. I was like, do you know what? I'm doing it because I want to do it, and I feel like doing it, and I think it's right. But of course, in a sense, like, you do have to follow rules at some point. So I basically actually just wrote that. I want to challenge the systems that exist, and the only way to do that is to not follow all of the rules. So yeah, I'd say, like, using language in a creative sense, in a metaphorical sense as well, is probably the way that I try and find freedom in words.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this idea of finding the freedom in words, that really resonates for me. Yeah, I mean, I've incorporated Yoruba into my work for a number of years. Like, I've called maybe 3 or 4 video works, have Yoruba in the title. Usually in a sort of play, because again, yeah, this idea of like playing with the words is very important to me. And yeah, again, it sort of makes me think about, that quote that I shared from M. Nabis Phillips, this idea of passing language, so like dismembering language. Because even with Yoruba, there's like old Yoruba, and then there's like, new Yoruba, so there's like the one that's, also been influenced by, the sort of like the influx of, there's like the pre and the post-colonial Yoruba, so I think also what and I also want to be honest about the position that I arrive at that use, as a diasporic subject who doesn't speak it with any fluency. For me, it feels more authentic to kind of rework rather than trying to pretend that that I can access it in a way that I can't. So actually for me, the kind of the juxtaposition and combining it with English, or, putting different words together, actually feels more authentic a way of would agree, but I approach things in my own way.
To add to that, so I'm of Jamaican heritage. So like when my grandparents came over, my dad's side were quite middle class, mom's side were quite country. So my dad's side just like basically dropped part one, started speaking formal English as soon as they could, whereas my mom's side like kept it going, And as it is, like, we speak Patois in the Caribbean, and it's an evolution of forcibly being ripped from a homeland and forcibly having your language taken from you, but in a way where we haven't let it go, but we're combining it with new things. And also we're combining it with other languages as well. So like Jamaica, for example, English was spoken there, and Spanish, and sometimes French, but at the same time, it wasn't just like one ethnic group taken to Jamaica. You had, Igbo, Congo, Akan. So like you got different language groups combining to each other. So then you got all these languages combining into one, and then Patois is what kind of evolved out of it. Same with like Creole or African American vernacular English. It's got its own language rules and linguistics, etc. But language is weird because I write poetry, and I'm a writer. I have to incorporate my Patois into what I write and incorporate into when I speak. But language itself, it lives and it dies, and it's quite sad to know that, maybe how you speak now might not be spoken in like 50 years or 100 years time, but languages go through, they evolve. What's beautiful about language, it doesn't stagnate. When you read the dictionary, there's certain language words that are probably used in 1800s, sometimes we don't use no more. It just evolves and it dies, and it's painful, but at the same time, it's also beautiful to think of how your language speaking now can evolve into something else, so you just got to keep it going. You might lose some words, add some words, and it can be sad, but it also could be a happy moment too. You just got to think about how your language will change. Instead of being the same, you got to think how it will change, because time keeps pushing. I think that's what I just had to add to it. Got another question. Okay.
HK?
HK, yeah. Do you, HK, do you want to read it or speak it? Not too sure.
I would just ask the question.
Okay.
So my question is again to do with language. And well, the first question is, did you ever find that book? Because I've been looking for that book for ages as well.
Oh yeah, no, I do have a copy now. One just popped up on Amazon some point. You know what? And I actually came across, somebody gave me another one, I think after I'd been writing that, but then I gave it away. So sometimes people, because of what I said, sometimes people will pass one on to me and then I pass it on again. Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, again, it's, there's a project I'm involved in about potentially republishing it, but then there's some questions around that as well, around like what that would do in this moment. But I mean, the Stuart Hall Library definitely has a copy. The library at Tate Britain, for London-based folks anyway. I mean, I know we can't actually access those spaces right now, but yeah.
Okay. And my other question was more to do with like visual language. So like, I think you kind of picked up on it with, I think it was your thesis that you said you put like the theory in the margin rather than like putting it in the center. And that's like, because I'm from like a design background, but I do like painting as well. And yeah, like that's like a visual way of communicating, right? So I was going to ask if you like, if you can say anything else, or like Josh, if you can say anything else about like visual communication, and like, because I'm just thinking back to like, because like I use a lot of like shapes and stuff in my work, and I'm always like questioning how people are relating to these shapes, and like maybe like the way that they've like been educated about like the ball, like a circle being a ball, and like it might automatically think that, or like just like you see a different shape and automatically like an image will come into your head. So I'm trying to explore like how we remember things and sort of project these visuals or like ideas onto a shape. So I thought maybe if you have any resources or like, anything to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. So yeah, I also have a visual communication background. My BA was in communication, and I just finished my first year of visual communication now, but I'm switching away from that for some reasons. So yeah, I'm also a freelance graphic designer. So like visual or playing with visuals in terms of words and content is definitely something that I'm aware of, but it's also something I don't really always want to utilize. I'm not one of them people that are like, okay, this has to be extremely designed. This has to tell a story other than the one that I'm actually saying, either within the words or whatever that is. So that's why a lot of the time, if I do have a text, it's really just simply written. And I'm trying to encourage use of imagination. Then like, I want you to build your own images in your own mind rather than me feeding one to you. But saying that the whole final chapter of my thesis is just images. So it's just, I think it's like 12 images. It's some really annoying noises coming from outside my window. I'm gonna close it. So yeah, it's just like a selection of images, and I'm basically telling a story with no words. So I kind of flipped it around, and this is gonna be a bit like of a risk of me to like climb on my windowsill while holding the laptop, but I don't really want to stop the conversation. It's like a warehouse conversion, so everything is a bit like old and hard to access. So then I just basically flipped it over, and I was like, okay, what will happen if I basically gave them a track, like, please listen to this song, and look at the images, and that's it, like no other real explanation. So playing with visuals is definitely something really interesting, but it's not something that I always necessarily utilize or have a lot of research into. I got into graphic design through Babes, the collective here. I'm friends with Naeem and Tia, and they basically invited me to do their visual communication for their alternative graduate show in 2018. And that was the first graphic design job that I did. And from then on, I just kept getting them. So I don't really have resources to recommend to you because it's kind of something that I just do intuitively, but it's definitely like a very interesting conversation to have. And I think I would actually be really interested to see or to experience this research or this project that you did with the shapes. It sounds like something that could actually teach me a lot about the practice that I kind of sit on the edge of.
So I'm also thinking about things like gestures, like I don't know, like hand gestures, or like, you know, you've got like body language, and these are also like visual things. So I'm, or maybe like, because whenever I've been like part of discussions to do like language, it's always like the verbal language, but like recently working with like kids and like just like like drawing shapes, like making marks on paper, and like that's like also another way of communicating. So
yeah, definitely,
it's like a visual language, right? So yeah, I'd be interested to have like more conversations on like the visual aspect, or like the body aspect, because also Evan, you do like performance, right, and also moving image, so like that might cross over a bit in your work.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think what I have to say around shape. I mean, in terms of hands, you know, I'm somebody who uses my hands a lot in my communication, and I've, you know, worked with hands in my work before, but again, you know, it wasn't necessarily in reference to anything in particular. I think sort of similarly to Josh, like I work in a very intuitive way, and you know, in my personal practice, and I guess it did become part of the show I did last year at the Strand. I mean, I work a lot with like sacred geometry, and I also do I do work with like, so as well as part of my manifestation practice, I also like channel symbols and stuff like that. So you know, when I talked about having affirmations and things like that, sometimes the affirmation will become a symbol, and it will still, you know, sometimes they're called sigils, things like that. I don't use that word, but so sometimes, you know, they take the form of symbols, just channeled symbols that I'll, you know, draw, and then I'll put somewhere, or I'll use them in practice. You know, I'm doing some shadow work with a group of people at the moment, and like I channeled, you know, sigils for our work, you know, these symbols for our work together. So yeah, for me, you know, I'm very much intuitively guided. Like for me, I mean, don't get me wrong, I you know, I do read a lot, but I never center that stuff. It's more like yeah. I always lead with the intuitive.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Yeah, I think something else I could maybe, it's not really gonna give you research context, but just more for myself, like performance did become quite a good way of also combining language with the experience. And normally, to be honest, if you look at not the last, but maybe like the main two performance works I did, it's just me dancing with kind of like a soundtrack on top. One of them, which was interviews talking about clubbing in Berlin, and the other one was the Patois project. And another way of it's not potentially visual, but I also kind of challenging this. Like I did visual communication course, but a lot of my work was also sound. And like, as I said about using the imagination. And so for example, with this Patois project, I would record the sound really close so it becomes muffled. So it's like ways of making the sound itself, the way you present the sound, also kind of telling a part of the message.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not exactly, oh, and also a bit, something that did interest me actually, a research that I started in terms of visuals was, I also tattoo, and I was looking at healing uses of tattooing, like on acupuncture points, but also as a way to like deter evil spirits, and also as a way to like help move blood around. And there's also a few studies about the use of ink, so it leaves a visual trace, which either can be reapplied, so it's the easy way to know where you need to do it the next time, but also the substance itself could have healing properties, like the carbon that they used or the wax that they used. So also the idea of an image or a mark being healing or being kind of an entrance point is also, I think, a really interesting thing. I don't have enough research to really talk about, but I think it's a really interesting subject.
That's really interesting what you just said. Again, like I mean, the last bit about like tattoos and stuff. I didn't even think about that as a thing.
And that's so interesting because I also tattoo, like not as something that's public, but I do tattoo my friends and myself. So yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to talk more about that
later.
Okay, we're gonna ask one more question. I'm just reading through your comments. You guys are amazing. Love this. You know. No, I love it. I can't come and kill myself. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, we got a question from Abiola. I'm going to read this out. So, how have you found navigating white arts education spaces and having to explain your references, your perspective, and be constantly questioned on it, which often takes time away from digging into a deeper conversation around a subject? It feels like you always end up having a beginner's conversation and it stops exploration in its tracks. How to avoid this for those still in education?
Should I go, Evan, or did you? I feel like you're the most appropriate person to talk about this.
I mean, if you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would just, it's more a reflection. I did a project which was, again, like a creative writing piece I wrote about being like a gay Black man. And it came from experience. I work in a strip club as a host, and I give tours of the building. I take payments and I make sure everyone's following the rules, basically. And I was giving a tour, and one guy, we got to the top floor, which is like the most expensive area with like a piano. It's like quite a fancy strip club. And he was like, are you into girls? And I was just like, no. And he was like, that must have been really hard. And I was like, I didn't really know where it was going. And I was just like, okay, like, can we go now? And he was like, being Black and gay. And I was just like, okay. Like, it was actually a really intense experience, because the only reference I had was that guy from Footballers' Wives, like the footballer, who like everyone hated because he was meant to be like the best football player, and then he was suddenly gay. And it just really created this image in my mind of like this struggle of being like a Black gay person. So I did write a text about it, and I used the image, which was later turned into a Glenn Ligon piece, that I am a man, which was from the Memphis, Tennessee social rights movement and civil rights movement, sorry. Made this into a t-shirt which said, I'm a Black gay man, while reading a poem about this experience, among others, while projecting on top of myself a video of this pastor talking about how gay people shouldn't be alive. So I was kind of overlaying so many different types of information, which only certain people would understand certain parts of it. And the point was that it should have been a battle, that I was challenging them to either side with the pastor or try and understand my story. So in a way, I kind of try to play with the fact that this experience is a challenging one for me, but also for everyone, and to try and also push people to do the work themselves rather than me explaining it. And luckily my tutors did know the references, and it was something we could talk about. But I think as much being kind of like weighed down by it, you can also push people and provoke them. Yeah, I'll pass over.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all of that resonates for me. I mean, as you're speaking, you know, I think about, yeah, those moments for me when, yeah, I felt misunderstood. Yeah, either in education, but also when it comes to like, you know, I also think about like reviews, when people review the work, and I'm like, oh, you didn't get it at all. Like, why did you even bother? But the text that comes to mind, and I realized I didn't put it on the reading list, but is Edward Glissant, Poetics of Relation, you know, and how, you know, in that text, he kind of talks about this idea of opacity, and legibility, and actually how there's actually a power in that space. There's actually a power in being misunderstood. And I think that's something I've come to kind of revel in a way, that actually, why do I have to lay things out in a way so that it can make sense to you? Like, I actually like that sometimes there's an in-joke or there's a reference that's just in a language that only me or my people can understand. Like, that's okay. You know, that is okay. And, you know, because again, for me, it's really important to decenter the art historical canon as the way that we engage and talk within the art educational context, you know? So actually this idea, or kind of being in a space where something isn't understood or you feel left out, like that's, for me, that's such a really productive space to then talk about how you're relating to an artwork, you know, rather than it being dismissed because like you can't access, you know. I would then flip and be like, well, so what's showing up for you? You know what I mean? Like, so then how do you access a work, you know? So I think it's also about, yeah, the questions that we ask, and yeah, what we privilege. in relation to that.
I actually just wanted to add that it made me think when you said about the opacity and the power of that. So also the I Am a Man slogan that was used was from the book Invisible Man from Ralph Ellison, which everyone should definitely read. And he also talks about this like visibility, invisibility, and how it turns into a power in the end. Yeah, that was it. I'll add it into the chat because it's really great.
Am I still there? Hello? Okay, so we're gonna read an excerpt first. Before I read the excerpt, I just want to add to what you guys talked. Sorry, my sister keeps trying to call me. When it comes to like talking about your perspective and lived experience, my only advice I can give you and other students is talk when you need to talk. I personally do not talk to white people about my experiences. If I don't need to do it, I won't do it. End of. I'm not doing it. I'm not entertaining it. You're not questioning how I live my life or my experience. You're not from my community. We don't go like that. And then two, when you're talking to like a lecturer or explaining a project to people, sometimes you got to do some psychological warfare. You got to play around with their emotions. So you start off by saying, look, I'm going to explain to you my life, my people, and I'm forming trust with you all. And I trust you to let me speak and then listen and understand that this is my lived experience, you know, not share it. After that, if they do the little menial things, the conversation's over. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not telling someone to get ignorant, but sometimes it's okay to get rude because some people get rude and it's considered passionate, but when you get rude, it's aggressive. And sometimes, like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, as long as you got your point across, you know. And it doesn't stop after education, it doesn't stop after university. It's going to be in the workplace, it's going to be in institutions, it's going to be maybe your next door neighbor. But you just got to just establish that I'm about to bear something with you and then see how it goes. But yeah, this was an amazing Q&A. You guys are amazing. You know, I love this, I love the vibe. I'm going to hand it over to Hamid, if you're on.
Yes. Yeah, this has been amazing to listen to these conversations and just like to hear about everyone's perspectives and experiences. And yeah, just to kind of round up and like touch base and like just see an example of like intervention in terms of trying to find a place to help people in terms of education in a non-traditional format. We're gonna read an excerpt from a book from Paul Dash and Dennis Atkinson, and it kind of roughly touches upon 198 and some of the kind of intervention models they've used in terms of like helping people who have been excluded from school or possibly on their way to the prison pipeline system, and how you can do that even in a gallery space. So I'm just going to share this screen quickly. And yeah, it's just speaking about a project called the Black Angels Project. And yeah, so it says 2/3 of the population of young offenders have left or been excluded from school at the age of 13 or under. Home Office research reveals that over 80% of young offenders of school age are out of school either through exclusion or refusal to attend. Now all of that points to the evidence of the link between school exclusion and social exclusion. So in collaboration with local secondary school Stockwell Park, Black Angels carried out the first 198 education project to address local issues directly. Stockwell Park, with its culturally diverse students intake and 40 different languages spoken, reflects the rich cultural profile of the borough. Like the 198 Gallery, it is set in an area of social deprivation where drug use, crime, poor housing, and unemployment are high. Struggling with a range of social and educational concerns, a group of vulnerable students from school were on the verge of permanent exclusion. The partnership with 198 Gallery offered these students another chance and alternative education tailored to meet their needs and support them in their interests. In response to specific government initiatives and with the aid of Lambeth Education Business Partnership, the 198 Gallery offered workplace-based learning to these 12 young people. Urban Vision staff have a specific combination of skills, and the project is designed so as to encourage personal responsibility and professionalism. Staff are qualified youth workers and freelance arts professionals in graphic design, new media, who can also act as peer mentors through shared knowledge and experience of contemporary inner city street culture. They have put together a process of personal journey for young people, which, while not solely focused on the end product, ensures a professional outcome while compelling them to think about their often antisocial behavior and learn new skills. Going to pass over to Michelle to take over, read the rest.
There you go. Hello. The group of Black Angel students comprised African and African Caribbean 15 and 16-year-olds. They visited 198 Gallery one day a week for 18 months to participate in a student-centered project that incorporated creative IT skills, music, visual and written literacy. Using software packages such as Adobe Photoshop and Quark Express, the students designed and produced their own images for the cover and interior of a CD-ROM, which they wrote and recorded. They took visual inspiration from their interest in graffiti art and popular culture. The Black Angels project and the development of the digital media studio initiated a working model. Out of this, in 2000, came the project called Urban Vision, bringing new ideas and structures together. A new media art education program for 7 to 19-year-olds offered projects and training, provided participants with the opportunity to have a voice on issues that are relevant to their lives. The 198 Gallery established key partnerships with a range of organizations as the link became more apparent between school exclusions and crime. Organizations involved included Lambeth Youth Offending Team, or YOT, social services, voluntary sector organizations, and Lambeth Connection Service. Wow, throwback. They referred groups of vulnerable, disaffected, and socially excluded young people to the project to explore digital media, photography, film, video, and animation, often within the issue-based context. You may hear some music in the background, so just kind of use that as a bit of a backdrop if that works for you. About 200 of these cases required a reparation element. Reparation is a major component in a restorative justice system that asks young people to pay back to their community for their crimes. Since 1998, there has been a movement towards a more individualistic approach to reparation, which involves looking at the actual offense, okay, wait, hold on. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Okay, which has been, reparation is a major component in a restorative justice system that asks young people to pay back to their community for their crimes. Since 1998, there has been a movement towards a more individualistic approach to reparation, which involves looking at the actual offense, having input from victims and outcomes that will benefit the fabric of the community. The belief is that the best community reparation will be that which challenges young people to reflect on their offense and genuinely gives back to the community through some means to which the young person can relate. It is the last point which has been the most difficult to achieve, particularly in the inner city context where the methods of mainstream education have little success. So yeah, that's really poignant to kind of read and end on. Paul Dash is an amazing educator. Some have called him like the godfather of educators, I suppose. He's put a lot of work in. as has many from his generation. He came up around the 1960s amongst other Caribbean artists who then became the Caribbean Artist Movement as well. So there's just so much richness in kind of his legacy and his experience as well. And we've had the pleasure of working with him as well. So just kind of recognizing that intergenerational exchange and conversation, and kind of learning about his own educational experience coming to Oxford as a young child. It's just very, very mad to hear that somebody in that generation, someone in my generation and younger ones are experiencing very similar things. So it's been really, really inspiring to listen to Josh and to Evan today, who have been able to offer some really, really insightful, wholesome, very considered approaches to reimagining education and actually actualizing those things as well in our everyday practice. So thank you very much for joining us. There is a feedback link in the chat, and if everybody could please leave some feedback. Be honest, be open, all of it will help us to do this as well as we can do. So thank you so much for your presence and your contributions.
I'd just like to say thank you everyone for joining today. It's really beautiful to witness an event like this. Thank you so much, Evan, and thank you, Josh, for your generosity with us and sharing yourself, your work, really beautiful words that you both shared with us today. Thank you everyone for your amazing questions. I can say for myself, I had a really beautiful Saturday morning and beginning of an afternoon of beautiful moments of togetherness, which I think is very important in this moment that we are in right now. So thank you again. And we have sessions coming in the next 3 weeks. Hopefully some that have come here today, if not everyone, can join again. I feel very grateful for this project, and thank you East, Rochelle and Hamed for your work, and thank you so much Ratimi as well for assisting with facilitating the session today. Everyone here is really amazing, and I'm super grateful for all of your presences today.
Thank you, Paula. Feeling very warm right now. And I just noted that somebody has asked if we could share the paper from Paul Dash. So we can definitely send that in a follow-up sort of email if that's helpful for everyone. So yeah, thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, guys. It was really, really nice.
Yeah, lovely to be with you all.